When I was 8, my sister and I shared a room on our first floor. Our bedroom door sort of led into the kitchen. My sister had this monkey clock that I looked at every morning to gauge how much more time I had left to sleep in. One morning at 7:20ish, I woke up and rolled over to look at the clock. In my groggy gaze, I got the time, but then who I thought was my dad moved in front of it. Now at the time I remember seeing a dark figure with no visible features like pure black. I did not think anything of it since I was just waking up and assumed it was just my tired eyes. Seeing this, and yes, I made note that I did, I started to rub my eyes and feel him sit at the foot of my bed. At the same time I said, "What is it, Dad?" But I didn't get an answer. I sit up as quickly as possible and see no one there. I look back towards the monkey clock, and under a minute has passed. I sprinted out of bed and into the kitchen to find my dad, but the only one there was my mum at the counter, with a now shocked look, with her looking directly at me. I mean, I did just come to her rushing out of my room for no reason. Before she had a chance to ask me anything, I say, "Mum, where's Dad?" Puzzled, she says, "He left at like 6:30, probably at work by now, why?" Obviously, I couldn't tell her why, she'd think I'm nuts. So I just said, "Never mind. Thanks, Mum. I'm going back to bed." For a good while, I forgot about it, but years later, my older sister asked me if I'd ever seen a black figure walking through the house. My heart stopped at the realization that my eyes were not playing tricks on me. Years after, I told my dad, who to this day is a skeptic. He, of course, didn't believe me, and said that just makes me think someone was in the house, which was impossible without my mum knowing. Personally, I believe, and also know he wasn't there to hurt me. Perhaps it was a caring soul that was just passing through, which is why I immediately thought of my dad. My dad died this past December. We were close, and I am still devastated. Dad was an Air Force officer, avid bird watcher, practical joker, and an amazing cook. He also put black pepper on damn near everything. I went to his farm to hold down there and take care of his dogs and chickens until they could be rehomed. While I was there, my stepbrother came to visit to keep me company for a day, and we lit a fire in the backyard fire pit and cracked a few beers. Half hour into our conversation, a bald eagle buzzed us. This was literally less than 5 feet over our heads. It wasn't going after prey and had no reason to fly that low other than to get a good look at us and let us know it was there. There's no doubt in my mind that was my dad. After my stepbrother left, I was walking in the house. There's a back door that leads straight into the kitchen, with a spice rack next to it. As I'm opening the door, a single container of black pepper flies off the shelf and lands about 4 feet away. There were a bunch of other spices on the shelf that didn't get moved, just the black pepper. I'm convinced that was also Dad. I immediately pour a little bourbon and another and another. That night, I got roaringly drunk. I cried my eyes out, howled at the moon, and screamed in the heavens. Everything I ever wanted to say to my dad, but I didn't get a chance to. I walked into the kitchen the next morning to find one of the mouse traps up on one edge. There's no way that happened naturally. I know my dad heard me, wherever he is. During the clean-out, I pulled my dad's wind-up clock off the wall. This was a clock that my dad had built the casing for, but hadn't worked in several years since my stepmother died. Dad, me, and my brother had all taken a crack at fixing it to no avail. It was a pretty clock, but if it didn't run, it was going to be given to charity. I pulled it off the wall and set it on the front porch, and lo and behold, it starts ticking. My wife's mouth fell open, and that both sent shivers down our spines. It was Dad telling me, "Don't give the clock away," and it now hangs in my house. And finally, After the funeral, 6 months after his passing, we returned to the farm to bury his ashes. While packing up and about to leave the following morning, a rooster shows up. It was the exact breed my dad had. It came walking along the street, turned to the center of the long driveway, and walked straight up to the house. There's a section of the front yard where Dad had buried his past dogs. The rooster walks straight up to the gravesite, pecks around for a minute, looks at me, clucks, then turns, walks out the gate and into the cornfield. Dad was the only person within 5 miles that had that breed of chicken, New Hampshire Red. I also think that was my dad, coming to say hello. This happened in 2005. I was just about to turn 20, between my first and second year of uni, and I found a summer job at a local video rent store. I miss those. It was open 8 a.m. to 1 a.m, so whoever was working afternoon shift had to close up, and was located in a calm downtown area, only a couple of blocks away from the city center, and whenever I had to close, I always took a taxi home, so I never had a reason to worry about my safety. After the first months, I had already learned who the regulars were, and because I was friendly and chatty, I started feeling in my element soon enough. I knew who were the good clients, who were the ones who always tended to be late to return DVDs and tried to evade the fines. There was, however, one client in particular who always gave me the creeps from the first time I saw him. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, and whenever he came to rent or return, he was always kind of hostile towards me, even in mundane exchanges. The sulky and rather sarcastic way he spoke to me gave me that vibe. I didn't take it personally, but let's just say he wasn't my favorite customer. So imagine my surprise when one day I come to work and my colleague tells me that one of our clients has asked about me and when I start work. She was teasing me, that he must like me, and I couldn't really think of who said client was because she didn't remember his name. When he came to ask about me, he didn't rent nor return a DVD, so she couldn't access his account. She leaves, I start my shift, and it was really busy that day, so I quickly forgot all about it. But then, in the evening, when it was less busy at around 8, guess who shows up? The Grump. At this point, I still haven't made the connection in my mind, and I groan inwardly thinking, ugh, why always on my shifts? Then instead of going through the aisles to pick a movie, he heads straight for the counter, where I am, and starts asking me questions like what my name is, where and what I study, if I have a boyfriend. And I'm trying to be polite and casual, even though he is, once again, talking to me with that hostile vibe, which didn't really make any sense to me. Then he starts going away, mid-sentence, but suddenly turns back to me and declares that he will come pick me up tonight after my shift is over, and will walk me home. I stand there completely puzzled and weirded out. Then I try to politely dismiss that offer by saying that I normally call a cab, so there is no need. But he doesn't even hear me. He stubbornly says, "Tonight I will walk you home. I will be there when the store closes." Now after he left, I felt relieved and tried to laugh it off and think nothing of it. However, the later it got, the more creeped out I started to feel. I was wondering, what if he really does come? What would I do then? So I decided to risk closing off early, and at 11:30 p.m. I've gradually started the process of finishing the shift, when suddenly I see a few guys passing by the store on the street, and I recognize an ex-classmate of mine. I quickly run outside and shout his name. He comes back and we greet each other with a hug. We used to be friends in high school, and I tell him about the creep and that I was scared.
My friend Theo says he was going with his friends for drinks, but he'll make sure to return around closing time to see me home. I exhale in relief, because I no longer have to close early, something that made me quite anxious to do as I hate breaking the rules, even though it was unlikely I would have been caught. And as I get back inside arranging DVDs in a much calmer state of mind, the clock goes on, and 12:30 comes around. I start washing the floor and thinking I might have overreacted by getting so worked up about this whole situation, and that maybe the guy was just a harmless grump who wouldn't act on what he said. Then I hear the bell jingle, indicating that someone had entered the store. I go to the counter and stop in my tracks. I see him, the guy, slowly approaching me with a determined stare. I start shaking all over, look outside, but the streets are empty. So I try to remain calm and not give any nervousness away in case I trigger him somehow. I continue finishing my shift when he asks if I'm ready, and once again repeat that I don't need to be walked home because I have other plans. This seems to annoy him, and he asks what kind of plans, since I didn't mention anything before, and my facade slips a little when I indignantly explain that it's not any of his business, but I made those plans after he last came. So I ask him if he doesn't intend to rent to please leave and allow me to finish up and close. He doesn't even budge, just stubbornly stands there and says, "Yes, you have no plans. I will walk you home when you finish." Now at this point my treacherous chin starts to tremble a bit because I'm on the verge of tears. I feel angry, frustrated and scared. I'm looking at the clock every few minutes and contemplate my options in case Theo forgets about me and doesn't fulfill his promise to return. It was 12:58 now. I was still stalling, seriously wondering if the situation warranted a call to the police. I was anxious to call them anyway, because I didn't want to trigger the guy, but also I was afraid to be scolded for bothering the police with insignificant things. That was my young, stupid brain. That's when I hear the doorbell ding again, and we both turn to see Theo walk inside. I had never been more glad and relieved to see him. So I put down what I'm holding and run to him. He slides a protective arm around my shoulder and asks if I'm ready, then looks at the creep in that non-verbal, defiant male way of saying, "You got a problem, bro?" Now this would be a good time to mention that Theo was a tall, bulky guy who did sports, so he was not someone you wanted to mess with, in comparison to the other guy who was rather slim. The creep looks at us for a few seconds as if weighing in his options, but then resigns and leaves. But before he goes out the door, he turns to me with a vicious glare and says, "This isn't over." Theo starts for the door, and the guy quickly left. He walked me home and warned me to speak to my manager and colleagues and warn them about him. The next day I told them everything, and I had to start taking only morning shifts for a while. A few weeks later, one of my colleagues said the creepster appeared and asked about me again. Mind you, he asked when I would be working the evening shift. They told him I only do mornings, and he seemed disappointed. He then started ranting, said that I led him on and then rejected him, and my colleagues told him that she actually knows what happened, so it would be best if he leaves, and leaves me alone, unless he wants trouble with the police. That seemed to work, because since then he never returned to the video store, at least not while I was working there. I don't know what his intentions were, but boy am I glad for Theo being there at the right place at the right time. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't have been. This happened when I was 25. I'm a female, and had been dating a guy for about a year. Things were going great, and he asked me to meet his parents, and invited me to have dinner at their family home. It was at his parents' house, where something unimaginable happened. My boyfriend was from the countryside, and his family still lives there. From where I lived, it took 3 hours to arrive by car. When I finally got to meet them, my boyfriend's attitude towards me changed dramatically, and it really surprised me. He was usually quite the gentleman, but in front of his parents he addressed me with such terms like you and oi. It was downright rude. He'd shout at me using these words like he was commanding me or something. He'd never treated me like this before, but since I was in his parents' home, I would put up with it and gave him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, what else could I have done? I didn't want to make a scene and embarrass him. I could see where he got it from. His dad was throwing his weight around and bossing everyone. His father shouted commands at his mum when she was doing something not quite to his liking, and it was pretty harsh. I looked over at her and she just kept her head down and did what she was told, like this was totally normal. His family were giving off some seriously suspicious vibes, and I was starting to regret coming here at all. It felt so awkward and intimidating. At dinner, his father stared at me and said, "When you get married, you will live here." It caught me off guard. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was a demand. I just focused on cutting up my food and waiting for my boyfriend to speak up for me, but he never did. So eventually I said, "Well, I haven't made any decisions about that yet." His dad glared at me. He looked so angry. "If you marry my son, you live here. Got it?" I couldn't believe it. He shouted at me, a guest. I stared at my boyfriend. He must have felt my eyes pleading with him for some sort of help or defense, but he was just as silent as his mother. It killed me when he looked at his father and just nodded. More to the point, my boyfriend had never mentioned marriage to me before, so I was totally shocked, and to be honest, our relationship had had its rocky moments. They started speaking of specific dates for a wedding, and the pressure was intensifying. Later after dinner, when I was alone with my boyfriend, I said, "Hey, I feel a bit sick. I want to go home. Something isn't quite right." He didn't say anything, so I decided to start gathering up my things and head home alone. Just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Are you running away?" He boomed. He had totally changed. It was like I didn't know him at all. He forced me back into his childhood bedroom. He overpowered me and shut the door on me and locked it. I beat on the door and screamed for someone to let me out. I was making so much noise there was no way that no one else in the house wouldn't have heard me. Things got worse when I realized that I had left my phone on the chair downstairs, charging. I couldn't do anything. I was literally a prisoner. I was stunned. And after a while the door unlocked and my psycho boyfriend's mum entered the room. I was pleased to see her. I thought she had come to my aid, but my hopes were dashed instantly when she handed me some papers. "Sign this. It's your marriage certificate. If you do, you can go," she said in a monotone voice. It was the real deal. "I won't sign that. I'll never marry him." "You think you can escape? Go on, try." She asked me to sign it again and I told her where do I go. She got up and walked out the room and locked the door again. I needed to stay calm. I was terrified, sure, but I needed to keep my composure if I had a chance of leaving. I decided to wait until the dead of night, turned all the lights off in the room and kept as still as possible. Before shutting off all the lights, I figured the window would be my best and only option for escape. I would have to deal with injury if it happened. I opened the window and managed to climb down onto the porch roof silently. It was amazing. I walked all the night and reached the nearest train station. Fearing for my safety, I looked over my shoulder for that crazy mother and father. Days and weeks passed after this incident, and I got an email from my boyfriend asking, "You think that's the last of this? You think you can get away? We will not forgive you." Because I was living on my own at the time, I was too afraid to go back to my apartment alone. I asked friends and relatives to let me stay with them, and pleaded. One friend who lived quite far from where I met my boyfriend allowed me to stay with them, and I felt safer. With the help of a lawyer and a support group, I achieved what he told me was impossible. I escaped from him and his family. I heard from friends and neighbors from my old life, and they say that they've seen him hanging around my former apartment and my old hangouts. Even though I live miles away from him now, I'm still worried he'll find me, or find a way to hurt me and my family. I was 11, almost turning 12, and my family decided to go to America for a holiday. where we stayed in Las Vegas for a few days at the Stratosphere Hotel. The hotel is split between hotel rooms and a large casino that we'd sometimes have to walk through to get out of the hotel. One night my parents had to go do something, and they told me to just wait there. So stupid of them. It had been quite a while, and they hadn't returned. Later, a woman, probably in her late 20s, approached me and asked if I would accompany her to the elevator because she was scared of them. My first thought, with a naive 11-year-old brain, was to of course agree, as I loved being a helpful hand to other people. However, I wanted to tell my parents where I had gone so they wouldn't have to worry if I wasn't there when they returned. I told this to the lady and then went on a quest to find my parents in the Vegas casino alone. Not really sure what they had gone for, but wanting to find them fast because I didn't want to keep the lady waiting was on my mind. I couldn't find them, so I decided to just go back and accompany the lady anyway, since I had nothing better to do and would probably be back before my parents returned. To my dismay, when I returned, she had gone. Soon after, my parents had finally come back, and they explained that she most likely was going to try and kidnap me, but left because I said I would tell my parents. In retrospect, I find it completely moronic to leave an 11-year-old alone in a Las Vegas casino for over half hour. It was a recipe for disaster, and God knows what would have happened had the lady still been there. I moved into the neighborhood I live in right now about 15 years ago, when I was 9. The school district in this area is really good, and a new elementary school had just opened up at the time, so my parents thought it was a great place to go. This is the general time frame for this encounter. Everything went fine and dandy for the most part. I attended 3rd grade at the school, and my sister went to middle school not too far from it. One day though, my sister came home with a note from the school's admin. Apparently there had been increasing reports of child predators in the area. Whether these had been noted via children telling their encounters or terrified parents reporting their missing kids, I was too young to know. The notice was warning parents about it and telling them to caution their children. Naturally, hearing this, my rather protective, exceptionally Asian parents sat my sister and I down and nearly gave us the whole shebang when it came to child predators. They told us as much as they could about the awful things a predator would do to us if we ever got caught, without having to use the word rape. Suffice to say, she and I got the gist of it. What I remember most clearly about the exchange is the pains that they went through to make sure we would catch on to any of the tricks that potential kidnappers might use on us. They'll ask if you've seen a little dog, my mother said to me. They'll ask you to help them look for it. Even though we were sufficiently spooked, I went to school the next day without thinking too much of it. After all, I didn't think it would ever happen to me. Now, because the elementary school was so entrenched in the neighborhood, it was within short biking distance, and I rode there every morning, and rode home every evening. And that day was the same. I remember turning the corner of the sidewalk and riding towards the T intersection, the corner of which my house occupied. As I was leisurely biking along, a truck slowly pulled into the street and drove up next to me. I want to say it was a black pickup truck, but I can't remember exactly. What I do recall is slowing down and looking over at it as the window rolled down. A man leaned out. I think he looked young, but as a child I had a somewhat skewed sense of age judgment, and I remember very clearly that he was Caucasian. He then proceeded to ask, "Have you seen a little dog?" I was so spooked I stared at him wide-eyed for a full moment before biking full speed diagonally across the road to get to my house as fast as I could. I remember glancing back over my shoulder to see him look around before turning into another intersection. What I don't remember is what I told my parents when I got home. The next day at school I got pulled out of class by the principal. She took me into an unoccupied classroom that wasn't being used for lack of people. She asked me all sorts of things about the man, What did he look like? What kind of car was he driving? How old I thought he was? I couldn't give them a very good description because I didn't know much about makes or models of cars, and I was afraid that any concrete details I could give them would just be my brain trying to fill in the gaps. She thanked me and told me that a police report would be filed. I didn't hear anything of it after that, but for a long time I was scared of being out of the neighborhood alone. 5 years later, when I was in middle school, I learned that one of the 2 kindergarten teachers at the elementary school got booked for child molestation. 2 years after that, when I was in high school, it was one of the gym teachers, so the area really did have a bit of a problem. At any rate, I never learned what became of my police report. Maybe the man really just was looking for a little dog. Whatever the case, sir, let's not meet again.
We live in a newer home that we had built. We moved in 2018. Ever since we moved in, I would hear things like footsteps or scratching. I would see what appeared to be shadows. It got to be as much as a forceful tap on my shoulder. This has gone on since we moved in. I'm home most of the time by myself. My wife and daughter are gone during school hours while I work from home. I have 2 dogs that mostly sleep all day in the dog bed behind me. This means I should not hear anything occurring outside of the immediate room I'm in. Recently, my daughter has said that she no longer feels safe in her room at night, also in the basement. She's 9. We explained to her that there's nothing to be afraid of and that she has both dogs to keep her company at night. She replies that the dogs no longer feel safe either. That's a hard one to understand. So in the last 2 weeks or so, we moved her furniture upstairs. My office remains down there, however. Since moving her room to the main floor, she claims to feel at ease and that she can sleep at night. One big thing, however. Now, I feel somewhat terrified to work downstairs during the day. It's hard to explain. I feel like all day I'm being watched. I feel brushes of cold air when the fan and air conditioner are off. One of the dogs, Luna, came down the hall the other day and froze halfway. She got really low to the ground and basically crawled into the office. She had this terrified look about her. She looked like someone was yelling at her or about to hit her. For the record, we do not hit our dogs, but she just had that look, like she was getting swatted. When she got to me, she was shaking, so I called for Daisy to come into the room, our other dog. She came down the hall and started to growl as she walked past the part where Luna had just been. She quickly went around the corner, turned around with her back to me, and stared down the hall. She was as stiff as a board, and I didn't move for several minutes despite me calling her over and over again. I managed to capture a full minute of her stance, and it creeped me out. Clearly both dogs saw something that I could not. This has been playing into some of my fears and makes me wonder if my daughter not feeling safe anymore is related. More so in the last few weeks. I've also found lights on that should be off, and others that are never on. And again, I'm the only one home. So either something is happening, or my mind is playing tricks on me. There have also been a few neighbors that have complained of issues lately. Things being moved, TVs turning on when no one's home, pets being locked in rooms, or dogs and cats fixating on things that shouldn't be there. How can we find out the spiritual history of our land is something I'd like to know. A little while after, it turns out that our dogs had calmed down. That was until I woke up in the middle of the night from what I suspected was a dream. It felt like the dog was jumping off the bed, which normally I don't notice, but it jostled me enough to wake me up. I slept on my side, so I slowly opened my eyes, and, as they adjusted or whatnot, I believed I saw something or someone at the edge of my bed. At that height they would have been on their knees, and I just heard, "You can call me Gary." Such an uncommon name. I don't know any. I don't work with any. None of my clients are named Gary. That is a name that was not on my mind. In other news, not sure I mentioned this before, but one of the neighbors around the corner who have experienced a lot of activity in their daughter's nursery, their house caught fire a week or so ago. Their house is less than 2 years old. It caught fire and they lost everything. The fire marshal said it started in their basement. Otherwise, things remain normal-ish, and I'm in a meeting with a medium tomorrow. Her initial research has her thinking that we live on a burial site, which of course is fantastic. Our family was visiting London, and we went to check out the Imperial War Museum. It's got some old planes and tanks which our 2 boys of 6 and 7 at the time wanted to check out. There's a special Holocaust exhibit shown on the 3rd floor of this very large building. Our boys are a bit too young to see it, so I hunker down outside the exhibit with my boys while my husband goes through it. Sitting there trying to keep them entertained, and suddenly my younger says, "Mummy, why is the lady crying?" At first, my older son and I didn't hear it, but then pretty soon all 3 of us are hearing it, and it's weird, like a high keening. Basically, it sounds ghostly, and it seems to be coming from the exhibit. My younger son is getting very agitated and says, "This lady won't stop crying." The building is an atrium type, so there is a lot of ambient noise. I convince myself the acoustics are making it sound freaky. There were easily 90 to 100 people in this place and it's loud. Sounds are bouncing off a lot of hard surfaces, but this crying sifts up to the top. As although not constant, I remember so many years later, and it makes my skin crawl. I'm looking around trying to figure out if other people can hear it, but it's a normal day for everyone else. No one else can hear it. We're all very creeped out at the time. My son says he needs to go to the bathroom. We all jump up thinking the same thing. Let's get away from this sound. We hunt for a bathroom on the 3rd floor and flee to this back office, and someone who works there lets us use their non-public bathroom. And mistake. The hair is standing on the back of my neck. It was dense in that room, and we all felt it. Whatever was there was crazy strong, and it was following us. My sons and I leave the room, that floor, and the building as fast as we could. We ran to the main floor and jetted out of there like we were on fire. My husband comes out looking for us, and when we asked what the hell were the crying sounds coming from the Holocaust exhibit, my husband asks, "What crying?" I said that we heard crying coming from the exhibit, and he says that he didn't hear any crying sounds at all. I don't know. We were just glad to be out of there. I go home and for some reason decide to look up the history of the Imperial War Museum building. Apparently, according to Wiki, the museum was acquired as a permanent home that was previously the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in Southwark. I'm sweating cold bullets now. Bethlehem Royal Hospital. This building served as an insane asylum, with some of the most abhorrent and abusive patient conditions ever recorded. The worst of it lasting over a century. Once upon a time, I lived on South Beach, Miami, and worked at a local alternative clothing store right on the main strip. One day in the middle of summer, I was at work with just the store owner with me there. It was slow season and the customers were scarce. So she made herself busy dressing mannequins on one side of the store while I sat folding shirts behind a display case on the other side. It was boring to say the least, but at one point the owner interrupted me to ask if I had seen her kids come through. They lived upstairs, so this would not have been unusual. However, I had not, and told her so. When I asked why, she said she could have sworn she heard some kids laughing and talking somewhere in the store, but I hadn't heard a damn thing. So she went back to her task, obviously confused. I resumed work folding the clothes and thought nothing more of it. All was quiet and completely unremarkable for the next 10 or so minutes, until a sudden movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I then turned to look just in time to see my bottle of vitamin water launch itself from where it was sitting on top of the display case, slam into the wall 5 feet behind, and spill all over the floor. No joke. That bottle flew into the wall like it had been struck by a baseball bat hard enough to get a home run. I say that I was perplexed, and that's an understatement. I sat there frozen and stared at the mess as I struggled to comprehend what and how it happened. I would have been able to see someone if they'd have thrown it, and no one was around, not a soul. But it wasn't physically possible, right? My brain felt like it was going to short circuit. A few moments later, I was still staring stupidly at the mess when the owner walked up to check on me. "Is everything all right?" she asked when she saw what happened. I didn't know what to say, but I think I mumbled something about the bottle getting knocked off the counter, and I told her I would clean it up right away. Satisfied but still confused, she shrugged and walked away. Now this is where it gets really wild. If you've ever seen a vitamin water cap before, you know it's made of quite hard, thick plastic that is nearly impossible to break without some sort of tool. So whatever quantum force decided to make an example out of my bottle that day must have been especially powerful, because the impact it had made against the wall split the cap clean through the center, sending both pieces flying in opposite directions before they hit the floor. I'm just glad I wasn't in the way. So take it from me, poltergeists don't mess around.
In the summer of 1995, I was 11. Sleeping late home alone at around 11 a.m. while my parents were at work. I got woken up by the doorbell, so instinctively I hurried up down the corridor, but before I rushed to open the door as I normally would, I remembered the many times my mum scolded me for opening the door without asking who it is first, or looking through the peephole to make sure it was safe to open. Especially after some previously creepy experiences having already taken place at this point. So I asked, "Who is it?" But all I heard was some unintelligible mumbles. So I thought about it and brought a chair up, stepped on it, and looked through the peephole. We lived in an apartment building, and on the right of our door was the elevator, and then the staircase. Since the staircase windows were on the far left corner, there was not enough natural light up there to help me see who it was. I just saw a male with some colourful t-shirts standing outside. I repeated the question, and then strained to hear the answer. He said he was looking for Miss Marjorie. That's my mother's maiden name. And I replied that she was at work. To give you some context, both of my parents are doctors. And I don't know if that sounds weird for the US or the rest of the Western world, but in Eastern Europe in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon for grateful patients to sometimes stop by, wanting to give them thanks by bringing fresh fruit or vegetables or produce from their gardens, especially those with which my parents had helped but couldn't pay. So the man said he was bringing something for my mum, except even in the murky light I could see his hands were empty. I asked what it was, and he said he left the package at the stairs. At this point, I'm starting to get this uneasy feeling that something isn't right. So I decide to be cautious and lie to him that I don't have keys, and said my parents are at work and they've told me to not open the door for strangers. So when they come back, they can help him. He starts to get agitated and said he can't wait that long, and then says he's actually bringing meat, so that it would get spoiled in the heat if it's left outside. I begin to hesitate, because what if he's telling the truth? Will I get in trouble for letting the meat spoil? But then I look through the peephole again, and see his hair, which means he has his ear pressed to the door, and he's listening in. This spooked me, so I said that I was sorry and couldn't help him, and asked him to come back later when I wasn't alone. He once again said he wouldn't have time to come back later, so he offers to leave and says he will leave the package at the stairs. So when he's gone, I won't be afraid to open the door and retrieve it myself. I keep quiet and intently observe him, as he goes down the stairs and makes noise climbing down. And then I freeze, because in the silence that ensued, I was just about to really open the door and check, when I saw his t-shirt sleeve behind the corner of the stairs. He was hiding, probably hoping that I would open the door thinking he were gone, when in fact, he was preparing to, what, pounce on me, break into our apartment? Maybe something worse. I got so scared I froze and just kept on watching, standing on the chair behind the door, and finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably maybe just 10 minutes, I heard him descend the stairs. I still didn't open the door. I called my mum's hospital, but she couldn't be put through, so I waited for them to come back home in the afternoon. They both got worried, but proud of me that I did the right thing. A few hours later, all the kids from the building and I are at the little square playground/bench area in front of it. It was buzzing with kids running around and grandparents, so it was very safe. My best friend Nina and I were sitting on one of the benches when suddenly a strange man approaches us and stands next to the bench and asks our name. I hesitantly say what it is, although my heart starts to beat faster as I recognize the voice. It was the man from the morning. This time I'm not alone, so I instinctively press myself closer to Nina when he says, "Well, I'm bringing something for Harry. But it's in the car and I've parked it there on the street. Will you come bring it to me?" For context, Harry is my father. Encouraged by my friend's presence and all the people around, I say to him that actually my dad is home, so if he waits there I'll go get him, and he could help him bring whatever he wants from the car, as I'm too little and can't carry heavy things. The moment I said it, the guy got quiet and then quickly began walking away. Not running, just very quickly walking. My friend, who already knew about what happened this morning, and I ran to my apartment and told my dad. He ran in his shorts to chase after the guy, but of course, he was long gone. My dad started asking away then, as once again, something typical for Eastern European countries, the grandma sitting on the balconies and the benches, looking out at everyone and everything that's going on, like a living security system. But no one has noticed anything except one grandma, an old lady living alone on the first floor, who says that a guy approached her earlier while she was sitting on her balcony and started asking about our family, then tried to ask for money to pay for the meat he was bringing. And he told her that my parents have purchased it from him. She told him she has no money, but stupidly gave him a lot of information like my name. We never heard anything about the guy, but thank God. Those questions are still puzzling me though. What did he want? Why did he say my mum's name? But then he said he was bringing something for my dad? Was he actually focused on me? Would he have abducted me? Whatever the answer, I hope to never meet him. I also remember that when school started after that summer, there was another situation that seemed weird and possibly dangerous. I was coming back from school and saw my friends gathered in front of the apartment building, but in the entrance furthest away from the one I live in. I was talking to them when I heard my mum calling me. I turned and saw she was heading to work towards the bus stop, but she never called me to go to her, and when I did, she told me she wants me to immediately go home. I grumbled, but obliged. So from my point of view, what happened was this. I reached our entrance of the building and opened the door, when I feel someone coming close behind me, but I don't turn and think nothing of it. Then I start climbing the stairs quickly because I was afraid to take the elevator alone. But I hear that there are equally fast footsteps following up behind me. And just when I was fiddling with my keys about to unlock the door, I hear my mum's extremely worried voice shouting my name from downstairs, which startled me. And then the footsteps stopped right before the person reached my floor, and they started coming back down. Then my mum climbs to our floor, hugs me, and we lock the door, and she tells me what actually happened. She's going to work but sees me talking to my friends. Then she looks around and sees a creepy older man standing near us and staring at us kids. While we are all oblivious to his presence, she calls my name and tells me to immediately go home. She turns and starts for the bus stop once I head home, but then an impending sense of dread consumes her, and she turns to look back. Seeing that the guy is no longer where he was, but actually following me, and in very few movements, sees he enters the building after me and disappears. My mum begins to run in a sheer panic, reaches the entrance and shouts my name, and then she hears his footsteps back down, and then when he reaches the ground floor, he passes by my mum and says he gave her such an evil, menacing glare, as if he wanted to strangle her for preventing his intentions. She said alarm bells rang in her head, and her whole body was full of adrenaline, ready to fight if she must, because she felt that I was in real danger. Do you think it was the same guy? I never got a chance to see him, and my mum didn't know what the guy from before looked like, so who knows? All I know is that I never want to meet either of them again. When I was at university, I had a good friend who was really good looking, but she never had a boyfriend or showed any interest in men. I was very curious about this, so I asked her the reason why I never saw her with a boyfriend. She said there were 2 reasons. She told me she had a boyfriend in high school who became obsessed with her. When she couldn't take it any longer, she spoke to him about mutually ending the relationship. He exploded with rage and attacked her. The second reason: before university, she commuted to school on the train. One day, she found something in her bag, a mysterious sealed envelope. She guessed that someone slipped it into her bag aboard the crowded train. The letter was very simple and only said a few words: love at first sight. It was a creepy kind of love letter. It wasn't addressed to her, it didn't have her name written on it. The envelope just creeped her out. Thereafter, she found a new letter in her bag each week. She said she did nothing to encourage these letters. Since this freaked her out, she stopped traveling to school on train. A few days after, she received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. Oh God, she thought, this is freaky. She didn't answer the call but saved the number as stalker. A few days passed, and she set up an answer phone to see if the stalker would leave a message, and she was surprised that they did. Her hands were shaking when she listened. Why did you go away? Why did you leave me? She said that she began to develop a fear of leaving the house and a fear of men. It took her years to recover from the fear instilled in her, not only from her ex-boyfriend but the train stalker too. Once she had her confidence back, she attended university. I wanted to help her get a sense of trust in men again, as there are so many good men out there. I knew that I was meddling, but I wanted to help, so I thought I would invite her to a party with males and females in attendance. I floated the idea to her and she reluctantly accepted. The day of the party arrived. I invited some of my best friends and male friends who I trusted and warned them all of my friend, that she was nervous, and asked them to be on their best behavior. My friends understood and promised to make the atmosphere great for the party. The party was held by our college mentor. I was so proud of her. She spoke to a man for the first time in a very long time and they had a really lengthy conversation. It was good and healthy to see. The guy she spoke to had the exact same taste in music and movies as she did, to the point where they had the same favorite song. They even came from the same area. They could have talked all night, they had so much in common, and I felt like fate had brought them together. When the party was over, he asked her for her contact. I knew this was going to be a big step, and I could tell she was happy with this, but she was too shy to show it. She said to me after the party on the way home that she was so happy and that she could fall in love with anyone else now. I was happy for her and felt just as excited as she did. A few days later, she received an email from him. She was pleased, as you can imagine, and I respected him for taking things slowly. After a week of emailing, she came running into my room to tell me that he had invited her on a date. The day of the date arrived, and my friend didn't want to be late, so she left her home with plenty of time. He sent an email stating, "I'll be there shortly and I'll let you know when I arrive." My friend decided to wait for him in the cafe. The cafe was crowded, so she emailed him with her number and asked him to call her when he got there. 15 minutes later, and her phone rang. It's him, she thought gleefully. And as she pulled out her phone, one word appeared on screen. Stalker? Her heartbeat rose. Old familiar thoughts and fears crept forcing from the back of her mind. She calmed herself and told herself, I'm okay. My boyfriend's coming. I'll be safe. She decided to answer the phone. Hello? Hi, I'm here. Where are you? It was the voice of the man she'd met at the party. Her new boyfriend. There was no mistake. He must have been the ones who put the letters in her bag on the train. She called me as she was leaving and said, I have no luck with men. She escaped the letter stalker with the help of her friends and colleagues. I don't know what they did, but they made him back off. I'm shocked and somewhat in awe at the stalker's fascination and persistence with my friend. I wish he had just left her alone. This happened to my mother, Emily. When she was in her early 20s, she was traveling from one city to another by bus for a business conference. Next to her was this young man heading to the same city. For the entire trip, he was telling her how beautiful she was, how he had fallen in love with her, and it really scared her. She attempted to ignore his confessions, but they had traveled together non-stop for 5 hours in a full bus. Come to find out that they were staying at the same hotel. It's the first night, and the guy somehow found my mum's room and kept banging on the door, pleading for her to open up, telling her he was crazy about her and that he couldn't live without her. She was up all night and scared to death in her room. She apparently notified the hotel, but they didn't do anything about it. By morning, things had quietened down, and she was getting ready to leave the room. She cracked the door open, realizing she couldn't open the door, as it was tied with wires from the outside. She was stuck in the room. She banged on the door for the longest time until the hotel employees heard her and were able to cut the wires to set her free. She bolted out the room as fast as she could and brought the earliest ticket home and called the cops and told them to get to the hotel and get the guy's info. She never saw him again, thankfully, as she wasn't sure what became of him, but perhaps it's better that way. What did he have planned? Why was he tying up the door? What's wrong with some people?
During college, I experienced what I thought was a potential haunting, due to certain events that made my room scary to hang out in. Everyone agrees it was a haunting, especially after we did a ghost hunt and got an EVP. The first event happened while my sister was in school, and parents were on a date, and my grandmother was in her room on the other side of the house. I was napping before heading to school. As I'm laying there, I hear footsteps down the hallway. My door is wide open, so I look out to see no one. I lay back down, and then the door slowly creaks closed. I roll over, and it slams shut. Panicking, I start yelling at my family, but no one says anything. I text everyone, and they're still where they were. I feel creeped out but try ignoring it. That is until the door slowly creaks back open, and once again I see no one. I start yelling for my grandmother, and I hear her door open and start making her way towards me. I'm staring at the hallway but see nothing aside from her walking towards me, and I begin freaking out, explaining to her what's going on. And right as she reaches my room, the door slams shut. She too is shaken by this, quickly opening my door and rushing me to her room. This type of event never happened again. The next thing to happen is in regards to the heat event. Now everyone would think an animal would be responsible, but how do you explain it being pushed out and hearing constant scratches when there are no animals to be seen, both in the vent and under the housing during said events? To explain what exactly happened, I'll talk about the events and the vent itself. You can find it at the foot of my bed, which is where my sister's bed is now. It was positioned between my bed and the television, and then my computer was to the right, and a wall was to the left. Not long after the door event, I was playing with my computer and started hearing faint scratches. Living in the woods, you get used to animals under your manufactured home. Well, it was weird, but I ignored it, until there was a banging against the vent. It looked like something was pushing up against it. I picked up my feet just in case, and just watched it, but nothing else happened. A few nights of this happening, my dad decided to check it out. Putting on gloves, he lifted off the vent, but nothing happened. The scratches continued without the vent being in place. My dad lowered a camera in there, but nothing was in the vent. He then went outside to look under the house. The siding came off easily, and still saw nothing but heard the scratches. We kept an eye on it, even having an exterminator check it out, but nothing came up. I started freaking out over the idea of something grabbing my feet, and so began putting my huge textbooks on top of the vent. I'd hear the scratches go on all night, fall asleep, then wake up to the books toppled over and the vent popped out. Nothing ever showed itself in my room. I had the door locked because my boyfriend lived in the room with me, so no one was coming in to mess with the books. This went on for months just before stopping abruptly. The night it stopped, we had another event. This was just simple but scary as heck. My boyfriend and I were sleeping. We noticed that the scratches were gone, and were in thought, wondering what was going on. As we lay there in the dark, we feel pressure on our legs. Our blanket is literally being ripped off us, downwards as if being pulled towards the vent. We panic and scream and then turn on the light, only to find that the vent is in place along with the books. This also never happened again. The last event that happened and sparked my sister to have us try ghost hunting was a few days later during the beginning of summer term. My boyfriend was at his laptop on the bed and I was on my computer. Our door was open and we were just there playing Aeon. All of a sudden, my bedstead curtains start swaying in the door like someone just walked in. I look down and literally see a dark, childlike figure crawling on the floor right by my doorway. The curtains are scrunched around it. It had holes where the eyes would have been. I freaked out, and it's just gone in a flash, but my sister in the other room, along with my boyfriend and I, hear what sounds like quick crawling down the hallway. This freaked us out, and we decided to go ghost hunting that weekend. I put up a cheap camera that my mum had gifted me and set it on my computer desk and aimed it at the vent. It had no night function, so it captured mostly sound. We take our 3 phones, all the same kind, and use each one to either film, take pictures, or voice record. We ensure everyone is hanging outside and turn off the electricity. When we went around looking throughout the rooms, nothing is found at first, until we listen to the recordings on the cheap camera. During the time we were getting ready, while we were in the hallway and about to close the door, we picked up what sounded like a dog breathing in the mic. It breathes normally as we're speaking, but then stops, sucking in a breath like it's been caught. When my boyfriend thinks he hears something weird in my room, it then began breathing for a few seconds before stopping again. When I responded, "What?" in a panicked way before breathing a moment, then stopping again. The breaths happen in between us all talking, as if it wouldn't be noticed, but then stops right as we start talking. It's almost as if something or someone was hiding in my room. Obviously, there wasn't, since my room was so small that my bed was in the closet and didn't have doors and there was no space under my bed for anyone to hide. This EVP is the only thing found, and it was beginning in my room. We had shut the door after leaving, and nothing abnormal happened when we opened it. The vent was intact, the camera was in the same place. It creeped us out though that I slept with the TV on just in case. After that was discovered, we uploaded it to YouTube and went on with life. Nothing scary ever happened again. Luckily, I even had someone clean up the clip for me and they confirmed that there were a total of 4 different voices. The breathing was there no matter how much they edited it, and they couldn't explain exactly what it was, but they thought maybe it was an animal. We did have a cat, but she was in her pet carrier outside during the hunt. Whatever it was, made for an odd experience I will never forget.
A couple of years ago, I was in a god-awful relationship with a girl whom I know now has borderline personality disorder, and is completely immoral. Every morning I would run a mile from my house to hers and prop my body in the window into her room, then leave when she let me. On one of those return trips, I was running back home in the freezing winter night, on the phone with her. Recently, my family had been showing some serious concern for me, telling me how dangerous the streets were and how many people died. I ignored them because this girl had me wrapped around her finger. So I'm running, it's dark and freezing, and my ear is as usual behind a blend of insults and arguing, when I hear someone yell, "Hey yo, who's that?" I stopped and turned and saw someone walking from their driveway, eyeballing me suspiciously. I held my palms in the air as the universal sign for I'm harmless and said, "Nobody," before resuming my jog home. As I cleared the street, I heard the same man, this time more hostile. "Come here." I ignored him, figuring he was just going to mug me, wasting both of our time as I was broke. He kept calling me, pursuing me through several streets until he changed up his yell. "Hey yo." Again I ignored this, but I stopped because I was out of breath from running in the cold. Then I heard 2 loud bangs from behind me. I never believed anyone when they said that the world slows down when you're frightened or worked up enough, but I found it to be very true immediately. My brain jumped into action as I put together what just happened. I felt a dull sting on my hip, and smelled something I only remembered smelling from sparklers or near fireworks, and I screamed and ran at the top of my lungs before desperately sprinting faster than I've ever moved in my entire life for cover. I tripped over some construction debris, but somehow managed to roll on, scramble, and go straight into another sprint as I heard bang after bang erupt from behind me. My phone flew out my hands and down the street at some point. I saw a police car and desperately waved my hands and screeched. Yes, as a man, I will admit I screeched like a little girl at this point, to help me, as loud as my lungs allowed, only to watch them take off after a van that fled the gunshots when I did. I got home and I saw a line scooped out my hip and realized that I could have died if I had moved an inch differently. I never found out why someone felt the need to empty their gun in an attempt to kill some poor guy in a messed up relationship, but I learned 1 or 2 things that night.
For quite a while, I've been aware of a ghost in my room. I feel a depression on the edge of my bed at night, like someone is sitting down on it. Once it tucked me in. That was the weirdest part, I think. It felt very strange. My Xbox turns on and starts playing Skyrim in the middle of the night. Then there was the picture of me sleeping shot on my phone from an angle that I would not have been able to take it at from myself. The room is always completely locked, doors, windows, everything. At least, it's not an angry ghost. Feels more maternal than anything. About 20 years ago, I went to visit a relative who had just moved to our town. She invited me into her kitchen for tea. We sat at a little table in the corner, but at one point she left the room to go and get something. I don't remember what. I glanced over to the other side of the kitchen and saw a man hanging by the neck over the stove from one of those plant hanger hooks. Moments later she returned and just said, "Not sure how you're going to feel about this, but I just saw a man hanging by the neck over there," and pointed to the stove. She asked, "What did he look like?" He had dirty blonde hair and mustache and wore a brown flannel shirt. She went white. After a minute of her just staring at me, she said, "No one out here knows this, but the reason we moved from New York was because our roommate hung himself in our basement, and he looked like the man you just described." I also have another story. Early morning Thanksgiving 6 years ago, I was taking the turkey into a large roasting pan to my cousin's house so that she could cook it in her oven, because I had other baking to do and they had 2 ovens. Their house was and is at least 100 years old. When you enter the house through the front door, you can either go straight through a hallway to the kitchen or turn right to go into the living room. Off of the hallway to the kitchen there is a small bathroom with a door that opens out into the hallway.
So my cousin's husband opens the front door and instead of taking the roasting pan from me, hurries to the hallway to shut the bathroom door that someone had left open. He steps into the bathroom and pulls the door closed so that I could make it through to the kitchen. As he's in the bathroom and I'm carrying an even heavier roasting pan, I feel an enormous amount of energy rush through my body, from behind me, through the front of me. And then I saw a very large man with dark, salt and pepper hair stomp away from me and go through the swinging door to the side dining room. I hurried to set the roasting pan down and then went to the still swinging door to look in the dining room to see what the hell just happened. When I pushed the door open and looked in the dining room, there was dead silence and I was stunned. I turned back around and my cousin's husband was walking into the kitchen and said, "Did you see that?" His face was deadly serious. All he said was, "I don't want to talk about it." And they moved to another house a year or so later. My final story goes like this. I had come home from work for lunch. It's a 5-minute drive, and afterwards I was driving back to work but had to take a different route than usual, right past a very large and beautiful cemetery. The street is divided, one with large trees in the median, so I pulled out and turned left. There wasn't any traffic. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I've driven down that road about 10 yards, no traffic, no parked cars, when I looked out the passenger window and suddenly see a young man sitting there on the curb. He's wearing long jean shorts, a red t-shirt and a baseball cap, and he's sitting on the curb as if he's waiting for someone. It surprised me so much because I hadn't seen him when I looked, and I should have seen him. So when I passed him, I looked in my rearview mirror, but then there was no one. I pulled over and actually did a double take, and actually got out, and there was still no one there. Fairly sure he was a ghost. This happened back in the late 1980s, when I was home one summer on break from college. About 2 years prior, my dad had purchased an old house with the intention of eventually tearing it down to build a new home. The house was built in 1916, and like most homes built in that era, it had a really unconventional floor plan. There was a central living room and a kitchen like any normal home, but the 3 bedrooms were more akin to a separate apartment. Each had its own separate outside entrance, a private bathroom, and a door that led to the common area living room, and a kitchen. Perhaps the place was originally intended to be a boarding house or something. I really didn't know. The other thing that was a little creepy about the house was that it was all wood. The ceilings, walls, and floors were all brown, and nothing was ever painted nor plastered. My dad was a pretty cool guy. While he was waiting for permits and financing, he let 3 of my friends live there for free in exchange for watching the place. They had a lot of parties, but my dad didn't care as long as none of the neighbors complained. I went to a few parties there myself when I was lucky enough to be home from college. Eventually 2 of my friends moved out, leaving my one buddy there to watch the mostly empty house on his own. He was not the type of person to be afraid of living alone in a half-empty house. In fact, he was fine with the situation. I'm at home one afternoon when the phone rings. It's my buddy, and he sounds terrified. He tells me to call the police and to meet him in front of the driveway of the house, but to under no conditions go in. I ask him why, and he tells me that there is a crazy clown in the house. Apparently he was sick with the man flu, in bed for the previous 2 days, when he finally felt well enough to go into the kitchen to get something to eat. He runs face to face with a crazy woman dressed in a clown suit, and makeup starts screaming at him. It was then that he ran out the house and called me in a panic from a nearby gas station. I called the police, and then drove over to the house, which was about 2 miles away, and find my buddy on the sidewalk out front, and he's very shaken up. I ask him to describe what he saw, and he keeps saying that there's a crazy clown woman in the house. I press for more specific details, and he describes her as dressed in a white clown suit with red makeup smeared all over her face. He's still a little sick, and looks really bad. And honestly, he's really freaking me out as well. There's no way in hell that I was going into that house to investigate the story. After what seems like an eternity, a cop shows up. My buddy tells him the exact same story. The cop then goes into the house while we wait outside. And after about 5 minutes, he emerges escorting a crazy clown woman who looks exactly as my friend described. She has wild, unkempt brown hair, wearing this weird baggy one-piece, all-white body jumper suit that is really strangely styled. What is really disturbing though is her face. She had a tube of lipstick which she crudely spread red all over her cheeks in a failed attempt to make them look rosy. Although we were both freaked out, the cop thought it was hilarious. The clown woman claimed it was her house and then accused us of being on drugs and trespassing on her property. When the cop told her to get in the back of the squad car, she warned him that she had powerful friends in Tinseltown who would have him fired. When he comes back to talk to us, he tells us he can't arrest her for breaking and entering because the house is half abandoned. He said the best he could do was drive her a few blocks away and hope she didn't wander back. This, of course, freaks us out even more. Fortunately, though, when they did a background check on her, it turns out she has an outstanding warrant and would be going to jail instead. That is the last time we saw her. When we go back into the house, we find all kinds of crazy stuff written on the kitchen cabinets in the same red lipstick that she rubbed all over her face. There was also some 10-day-old fish in the fridge that my friend never got around to eating that she cooked on the stove and ate. The really scary thing, though, was this crazy woman was in the same house with my friend for at least a day, while he was sick and semi-delirious in bed with a fever. She was probably harmless, but who knows what she could have done if she stumbled upon him while he was sleeping. His door was unlocked the entire time. Fortunately, she never did, as far as we know. One of the things she wrote on the cabinets in lipstick was her name. While I'm not allowed to disclose what it is, I googled it and found a mugshot that was taken of her some years later. So, creepy clown lady, let's not meet again. I'm going to warn you now, if you're easily triggered, please consider stopping here. This is true and a real experience which happened while I was delivering newspapers early one winter's morning. It was around 4 and it was freezing. I was out on my usual paper route delivering newspapers. The whole neighborhood was still shrouded in complete darkness. The bitter winds were blowing strong. I was approaching an apartment block with my papers, and as I was heading out to a dark corner of the building, I heard a voice, and it sounded like people were talking. What the hell were people doing up at this hour out in the cold, I wondered, and squinted my eyes in order to get a better look. As I drew closer, I saw there was a woman doubled over and crouching in the hallway before me. Instantly, I knew something was wrong. As I got closer, I noticed that all the woman was wearing was her underwear. Why was she out here in the freezing midwinter morning, alone with no clothes on? She was shivering. I went over to her and asked her what happened, if she was okay or if she needed any help, but she wouldn't reply. I couldn't stand to see her like that. Before long she would freeze, her lips were already beginning to turn blue. I took my coat off and tried to put it around the woman, and she pleaded with me not to give her the coat and tried to push it off. She muttered something about if her husband saw her with the coat, she'd be in trouble. In that moment, I knew I had to do something. I suspected domestic violence and I called the police. While I waited for the cops to arrive, I waited with the woman by her front door. She still wouldn't say a word. I didn't know how long she'd been out there. It was truly sad and haunting to see that woman alone in her underwear on a dark, cold winter morning. While we were waiting for the police, her front door burst open, her husband came rushing out, and he started shouting at her. She cowered as he threw a punch at her, and I obviously intervened, and thankfully I was strong enough to protect her until the police arrived. The woman broke down, told them that this wasn't the first time that he had forced her onto the cold in just her underwear. So it seems like this kind of thing happened all the time, which made me sick to my stomach. I've always tried to see the best in people, but this incident rocked my confidence in human beings being decent. I mean to throw your half-naked wife out into the cold. Humans are the worst. When I was about 12, my older brother got married in Massachusetts, about halfway between where his wife's family live and where our family lives. Since the wedding was so far away, we decided to stay the night before and the night after the wedding in a hotel close to where the wedding would be. Everything was going all right until the creepiest thing happened the day of the wedding. Everyone was running from room to room getting ready. We had girls getting ready in some rooms and men in the other. My family was all over the place. Every time someone would go to a new room, the door would lock behind them, and we would have to knock to get to another room unless you had the room key, which the children did not. The rooms were all so close that my mum wasn't remotely nervous, having myself and my sister of 11 going from room to room where our family was, since this whole hallway was basically just us. At one point I left my room where my sister-in-law was, and wanted to go to our room where my mum was. I knocked on the door, and at this point everyone was already in a room. I was the only one in the hallway, when all of a sudden an older man opens up the door to the hotel stairs, which was directly down the hall from me. He stood there staring. I have a history of abuse, so this sent my anxiety into overdrive, and he started to really take slow steps towards me. At this point I started to slam on the door, yelling for my mum. When she finally opened the door, the man turned around and booked it real quick back down the hotel stairs. I was absolutely petrified. We never saw him again around the hotel. I'm 25 now, and still wonder what that man was going to do, if he had made it to me, or if he was just purposely trying to freak me out. But I'm glad that I never found out. I'd been with a girl for a few months. We were pretty much inseparable and spent almost all our free time together. Most of said time was spent smoking weed, drinking and popping pills. Enter Sean. Sean is a 100% confirmed rapist who is locally famous for doing said action to a 14-year-old girl and getting away with it because it took her too long to get to the police. The guy was inherently mentally unstable and had a ridiculously long list of girls he had harassed. Sean was by far the creepiest guy I'd ever met, and of course, he sold weed. In the early morning around 1 a.m., we were freaking out at our lack of weed. We wanted to smoke pot and watch Trailer Park Boys all night, and those plans were being thwarted by all our normal hookups not responding. Contacting Sean was protested, but we were a bit desperate. She called him, and he immediately offered to drop the dope off. She opted to meet him in a Walmart parking lot. After she got off the phone, she explained to me that Sean was a tad bit obsessed with her, and that he'd stalked her in the past. So she drove us up, and he was there on time. Sweet. The guy didn't know I was there, so she started walking to his car alone, and he made her get into his passenger seat. Being the overprotective guy I am, I immediately noped out of my seat and went to his car. I went to the door, opened it and said something like, "Got the weed?" then pulled her out the car and walked back to hers. In the car she informed me that he touched her thigh as they exchanged. I told her to stay away from him and she agreed, and that it looked to be a good idea. So we went to her house and smoked his weed. In retrospect, I'm lucky it wasn't laced. And he started texting her dozens of messages, calling her a plethora of insults and talking about doing all kind of things to me. We laughed at him and got high as hell and turned on Netflix. A good hour into our watching session, she got a phone call from him. She tosses it on speaker and he says, "I'm outside your house." We look at the main window and there he is, standing on the sidewalk like a jackass. Considering we had pot, used pipes all around the house, and tons of illegally obtained pills, we felt like calling the cops would be a bad idea. So we went upstairs and watched him from behind the curtain, freaking out. He stood outside for at least an hour, maybe 2 before leaving. I spent 4 to 5 nights out of the week at her house, and at least 2 of them would include finding him standing around the house or in his car. This went on until we got arrested for drunk driving, where they found a crap ton of devil's lettuce in his car. So yeah, kids, don't do drugs.
I grew up in a suburb right outside of Montreal in Quebec. Most of the homes in this particular area were built in the 50s and 60s. There was this house, number 217, that my mum always admired. She knew the owners and would help the lady carry her groceries home. 20 years later, this house went up for sale and my mother begged my father to put in an offer. They had just experienced a large financial loss, and my dad wasn't ready to buy another home. However, to please my mother, he provided an offer he could afford. This offer was way below what they were asking, yet they accepted the offer without question. The house at the time had been owned by the previous couple's son. I was 9, and my sister was 6 when we moved into 217. My parents owned the home for 22 years, in which the only comfortable years were the last 7. To say the house was haunted was an understatement. So much so, we rarely speak of it today. People always questioned how people stay in homes like these, but my parents struggled a lot during this time, so a move was never possible and not affordable. There are many stories, but the one I'm going to tell you is about the one that completely flipped my mum out and had her demand to my father to find help, to be rid of them. Sharing this story so many years later is giving me chills and actually making me feel uncomfortable. But I will proceed. My bedroom, you see, was the most active. It was at the back of the house and had a huge window. One night, I was exceptionally frightened to go to sleep. My mum said she'd stay with me that night, as she could see that I was visibly shaken. Mind you, I was over 20 at this point and not a little girl. There had been nightly occurrences, and I was done. That night I had a dream. In the dream it was a super still winter morning. The sun wasn't up yet, and I could hear the wind. I was at a bus stop, and there was a group of about a dozen people standing behind me in a perfect semicircle. Everyone was fully covered, face as well, with scarves and gloves, so I couldn't see their faces. So I wondered if the reason I couldn't see their faces was because I wasn't wearing my glasses. I reached into my pocket and pulled them out. Suddenly there was an elderly man in front of me. He grabbed both sides of my glasses with these super thick brown leather gloves and helped me slip them onto my face. I believe he spoke too, but it's been near 30 years and I've forgotten that part. Before I could focus in my glasses, I woke up. I felt a heavy weight against my back and thought it was odd. Why is my mum so close to me? That's when it gets really weird. I realized I was lying on my stomach. I looked over and saw my mum. She was at least 1.5 feet away from me and asleep. I began to panic. I slowly tried to get up, yet the more I tried, the heavier the pressure against my back got. I counted to 3 and jumped from the bed quickly. I felt whatever it was roll off the bed, and I heard it run out the room. I looked over, and my mum was sitting up on the bed with a look of incredible fear in her eyes. "Did you see that?" she asked. So I said, "No, but I had a weird dream." She asked me to tell her first. I do. She then proceeds to tell me what she saw. She said she woke up and turned to see me. Now, to give you perspective as to how she saw this, the large bed in this room was pushed up against the wall, and I had been sleeping on that side. She said the wall looked as though she had just been looking at a large movie screen, like a projected image, in which she saw a semicircle of spirits in a shadow form surround me in a semicircle. She then said, I opened my eyes and said to her, "Mummy, don't worry, they like me." She looked up, and hovering above me was another spirit. At that moment, she said, I shot up and suddenly, the spirit floating above me flipped around off the bed and out the room, and she heard it run out the room too. That morning, my mum had enough. We had endured this house for long enough, and she and my dad found someone to remove the spirits. They finally succeeded with the help of multiple people, and they finally enjoyed the home for 7 more years, but we often felt that they never really left. To this day, the number 217 gives me the creeps. Typing this out now is making me feel uneasy. My sister never wants to talk about the house, and she too gets goosebumps just seeing that number. I wonder if the people who live there now feel the same. October 20th, 6 years ago. I came home from class at around 11:30, and no one else was home. I hung out at home for a bit, and at 2:30, I was overcome with sleepiness. Being the bum that I am, I lay down in my bed and set a timer on my phone for a 20-minute nap. I fell asleep quickly, and after around 5 minutes I was awoken in my bedroom to the door opening, and had a split second of a panic before my dog jumped up on my bed and laid down next to me. Then I fell back asleep. After another 5 minutes of sleep, I instantly jolted awake because I was certain that there was someone standing next to my bed behind me. I assumed it was my mother, who would be likely pissed that I was sleeping in the middle of the day. I awoke and turned around in one movement, and there was no one. I checked my phone and had another 8 minutes of sleep. I went back to sleep only to be woken up by my phone ringing. It was my mother. She said that my great aunt, who had been in the hospital after a stroke-like event for a week, had died at 1 o'clock. My mum then said that she knew my aunt was going to die today because she had seen a wraith, a sort of ghost, a warning that someone was going to die that very morning. My mum is Scottish and very superstitious, but I don't believe any of that. She said that when she woke up in the morning to take my brother to school, she went into my room to see if I was still asleep, and she saw a wraith standing next to my bed. It was at that point my brain crapped itself. It was a Sunday, early afternoon. The family had gone to church, and I stayed at home as I'm an agnostic and hate church. I was sitting in my bedroom fiddling with something. I can't recall what I was doing exactly when out of the corner of my eye I saw a creature. That's the best thing I can describe it. It looked like a small demon. It ran across my room towards the door. This happened within a fraction of a second, but the fear that ran through my body was intense. I'm just getting chills now remembering it. I quickly ran down the stairs to the closet, grabbed a baseball bat, and sat on the couch in the living room while waiting for my family to return. When they did, I slid the bat under the couch and made no mention of the event to my family. The best description I can give the creature is the resemblance of the warlock imp in WoW. Very small, very fast. Bear in mind this was several years before WoW even existed. I'm just giving you an idea of what it was that I saw. I was 10 at the time and was visiting my hometown, Ecuador, for the summer. At the time, I knew just about everyone in my small town, Alausi, and so did my parents, which is why they let me go out on my own that day. Back to when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit of my hometown in Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out about our whole stay. One day my mum and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding when I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay home alone during the duration of the wedding, but I saw that it was a beautiful day outside and asked my mum and dad if I could go to the park, as it was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out and there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I argued until they finally gave in.
They said that I could go to the park, as long as I was back before it got dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there, and I was ready to make new friends and play around. But oddly enough, there was no one there. It looked abandoned, which was weird, seeing how this was one of the 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid it no mind. I believe I ran over to a swing set or slide and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of a gate and motioning me to get closer. Behind him was a white van, which I had noticed before, but just thought it was a delivery truck of sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me in Spanish, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him, and he gave me that clown frown and then said, "Well then, let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car, and by looking inside I saw that there were only 2 boxes, though I wasn't sure what they were filled with, and that was it. No seats, no posters, just those 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it, and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end of it and blew till the balloon was fully inflated. He tied the end and started to form a balloon into the shape of a dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned for me to come closer, to which I complied, and handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like it?" I nodded yes this time and gave him a small smile, and he then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that even as a kid, I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks, I would have to get into the truck. I told him the exit was on the other side of the park, and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said a few words that still haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer, and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck. Come on, kid." While saying all of this, he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger, as though he were annoyed by this. He placed his hands on his hips and said, "Oh, but we're having so much fun." Right when he said that, I heard a voice on the other side of the park yelling, Son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown and just ran to the man and gave him a hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained," to which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around, I was able to hear this man murmur, "Sick creep." I looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" He gave me a sigh and explained everything. As it turns out, he was not a real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids all across Ecuador. He would lure children with the clown costume and take them away to God knows where. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town, which is why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to save me. As he told me this, he also dialed for the police to report the incident. We had finally arrived at my house and the man said, "Be careful who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they seem." I gave him one final hug, gave him a thanks for saving me, and he gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay, boy. Now hurry in. I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran into the house. No one was there, and by the time they had returned, I decided not to tell anyone since I knew they'd flip out. It took a while to forget about the whole incident, especially with those words that kept reminding me of him. But I soon forgot, till I came across this page, and memories of that clown flooded my head. I'm not quite sure what happened to the sicko, but hopefully he is now behind bars. So, to that creepy clown from long ago, let's not meet again. There is a huge park near my house. On weekends and public holidays it gets really busy. However, at night the atmosphere of the park is entirely different. Back when I had just moved into the area, I was unpacking. I had so much to do and there wasn't an end in sight, so I decided to go to the park for a change of pace. The park had swings and slides, plenty of stuff. Next to a public toilet there was a phone booth illuminated in the darkness that creeped me out a bit. Later, when I had finally finished unpacking, it was around 1 a.m. and decided to go to a convenience store. The whole time I was walking, I felt as if someone was watching me. I didn't want to look over my shoulder at any point. There was the phone booth. Ordinarily, I would walk past it without paying it much attention, but for some reason I stopped and stared blankly at it. After a few minutes, I snapped out of it and ran to the convenience store and bought a few more things. Sweets, a bento box, and went on my way home. Halfway through the park, I realized I was desperate to go to the toilet. It was unavoidable. I had to use the toilet in the park. At that time of night, I was the only one in the park and it was quite frightening. As I was washing my hands, I heard a phone ring. I checked, but it wasn't my mobile. It was coming from somewhere very close to the toilet though. The payphone was ringing. What perfect timing, I thought. Two thoughts entered my mind. The first, curiosity. What if I answer it? The second, fear. Do not answer it. In the end, fear won. I ran back home while the phone rang behind me. Back home, I sat down on my sofa and tried to organize my thoughts. I was still thinking about the phone booth. From my window, I could see the park and phone booth. I wasn't sure if it was still ringing. I watched for a few moments as a man appeared from a nearby toilet. The light of the toilet illuminated him. In his right hand, he was holding a mobile phone, and his left, something sharp, like a tool or a knife. It took only 2 minutes to run back to my house from the park. I was just there. I thought there was no one else in the toilet with me. My suspicion is that the man was waiting in one of the other stalls and dialed the payphone number, and would creep up to whoever answered the phone from behind and murder them. What if my curiosity was greater than my fear? Whenever I think about what could have happened, I shudder. Last July, we planned a special day for my husband's birthday. We went to the zoo, and then we stayed at a Sky Baris, the hotel rooms that have pools and stuff. The way they're set up is the hotels are like little condos on their own, and we had to drive around to get our little condo room. We were watching the new Pet Cemetery, and it was right around midnight. Terrible movie, but sets the upcoming mood. We start hearing banging on the door. Assume it isn't anything, as we are in our own little bubble, but it doesn't stop. For about 20 minutes the banging continues. We honestly thought it was just the outer door flailing around due to wind, but it never stopped. I went to the bathroom and I can hear my husband yelling at the door, "You're at the wrong room." Apparently it was a woman banging on the door at midnight. We thought she was drunk and trying to get into our rooms for some reason, but the banging continued for another half hour. We were terrified, but literally thought it was some drunk woman trying to enter and got confused to where her room actually was. The banging stops after nearly an hour of it, and we were both quite anxious and wanted to go to bed. The next morning we got to the door to check and grab our stuff to leave, and we were greeted by 4 police cars and an ambulance, and 6 officers standing around a woman laying on the grass. We went to check out and said something to the woman at checkout, and she asked if she knew anything of what was going on in front of our room. They apologized and told us the police were already there before they got there and didn't know anything. Feeling guilty now, we go and talk to the police standing outside and give them our information, telling them that this woman was banging on our hotel room door for about an hour last night at midnight. They thank us for the info and let us know that this woman had a mental issue and she had escaped from a facility the next town over and was considered a missing person. What? They never followed up on our info, and as many times as I tried to figure out what was happening through Google searches, I never found a thing. But it ranks quite high up on the strangest things I've ever encountered.
When I was 4, my dad finally managed to get a house with my stepmom. It was a great accomplishment. My stepmom was happy about the accomplishment. That was until she realized that I was a bit more than she expected. She asked me if I disliked the house. Through her words, my response shook her to her core instead of answering her question. I looked her dead set into her eyes and said in an unwavering manner, "The house is haunted," which was strange being that I was only 4, and I didn't really believe her. That is until I read her facial expressions. There was no indication of lying or making things up, which discomforts me still. Nonetheless, my dad at the time tried to shrug off my words and thought that I was just joking in an attempt to uplift my stepmom's excitement. For the next 5 years, I would grow up in that house with discomfort every time I slept in. I didn't feel like I was alone. I would grow up suspicious. It was until I felt like I was being watched that it would cause me to flee from my room in distress at the dead of night, crawling to my father in fear. He would shrug it off, claiming that I was just paranoid or tired, and that it would be the cause of me experiencing such things. My stepmom would always wake up to the feeling of being watched, and some nights would flee to the living room area near the front door and fall asleep on the couch. Dad believed that it was just hormones kicking in due to her soon being a mother. Before my stepmom gave birth to my first little sister, I had an experience. I woke up one night feeling the need to wee. I climbed out of bed and did my business, and came back only to stop when I realized that my window was open. I didn't know if it was open before, but what really made my stomach drop was the feminine black figure. I didn't move. I felt like if I did, something terrible would happen. So I didn't. After a small while, I bravely took a step, and it snapped its head at me, and the dark figure zoomed under the bed, and I broke out in tears. I ran to my dad and slept with him. I don't remember the rest of the night, but when I woke up, I saw a trail of throw-up leading to the bathroom from my spot. Then my stepmom gave birth to a baby girl. Then there was another experience before my younger sister was born. It was during the summer. We were getting ready to go to the lake. I was confused though because I heard a bunch of banging outside in the backyard and began looking around. I found my dad and asked him if he was okay. Turns out he wasn't the source of the banging. I would have to continue the searching. If it wasn't for my father calling for me to help get water, the backyard was suddenly on fire. I was so scared, but my stepmom got a hold of the fireman. I swore to God when fleeing, I saw another dark feminine figure waving. Soon enough, my stepmom gave birth again to a girl. The last straw of the house for me was when I encountered dark male figures in a lampshade, and I thought I saw a chair moving. I screamed and ran downstairs to tell my parents in tears and snot, all while tripping down the stairs. My dad did research on the house with people who were familiar with these types of things. Next thing I know, we moved out, and I was told to never tell my sisters why we really moved. But now that I'm watching them grow up, their two figures and shadows remind me of the two black feminine figures which I encountered in that house.
I'm 40-something, and this happened way back when the world was not such a scary place. I was born with kidney disease, and had several surgeries from ages 1 till 11, until they got it right. This instance was when I was about 5. I had just been released from the hospital, and Mum had to go stop at the pharmacy, the only one in our little town, on the way home from me being discharged to pick up my meds. She pulled into the strip mall where the pharmacy was located. Apparently some store was opening in the center, because there was music, and I saw balloons everywhere. But I was so tired. I had been laying on the back seat and remembered looking out and then laying down, and Mum locking the doors. I rolled down my back window about 5 inches, as we live in Florida, so you can never sit in the car with windows up, and telling me not to leave the car. I think I fell asleep. I awoke to the horror of an arm reaching through the window to unlock the door. It was a clown. The clown was coming to get me. Kill me for all I knew. I never trusted clowns. He opened the back door, and I jumped over the seat in front and laid on the horn screaming like a wild child. My mother and everyone else within earshot came running. The clown was apologetic, offering a twisted balloon in the shape of a giraffe, saying he just wanted to give it to me. No thank you, no way. I was inconsolable. And that began my unnatural fear of clowns. I even hated Ronald McDonald. Sorry, a clown is a clown, a person hiding their face, even at 5, and I had no time for it. Fast forward 2 years, I'm 7, in the hospital, sharing a room with 2 other kids, and a free bed. For those of you who don't know, kidney problems are miserable. You have to pee, you can't, and when you do, it hurts badly. I'm just out of surgery, and we get visitors to cheer us. Clowns. I'm groggy and losing my mind, crying, screaming, and again, inconsolable. Why the hell are there clowns in my room? I didn't ask for them, I'm sick and in pain. Get the hell away from me. After they remove the clowns and the nice nurse sits with me until I fall asleep, I wake up to find a giraffe balloon that a clown left me. Sure, it's probably a coincidence. I think giraffe is the basic balloon animal required for clowns. Matters not to me. I'm an adult now. And I swear to heavens if any clown approaches me, I will consider it a threat to my life and drop kick him immediately.
I have had several creepy experiences. I'm going to start from the one when I was in college, in my bedroom. The building was modern, and so I was more caught off guard. I guess you expect ghosts to be chilling in some old stone building and whatnot. I lived in Lincoln, UK, which is a fairly historical city. I was laying in bed at night, grinding shinies on Pokemon Diamond, when out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. I looked up from my white DS, and at the end of my bed was a figure, a woman in all black, just staring. I stared back, silently, my brain frozen over. Without looking away, I felt for the light switch and hit the light. For some reason I assumed that this would make it go away, but it didn't. I shouted, jumped out of bed and ran. My housemates were all awake in the living room, and they were super concerned. We went back to my room and there was nothing there. I got mocked for the rest of the year. Roll on 4 years, I'm living on my own in China, Nanchang. In the winter, it gets cold and lonely. Being the social butterfly that I am, I decided to buy a bird from the old pet market. The guy gave me a fairly good deal on a majestic baggie. I don't know what her English name is. He assured me that I would be able to teach the bird to talk. Lol. It didn't take long for the bird to become used to me, and eventually would happily sit on my head, hand or shoulder, but would never talk. I named it Boromir, after the most important character in Lord of the Rings. As winter went on, things started to get a bit strange. One night I was sitting watching Arrested Development, when all of a sudden the bird began to laugh. Not that weird, right? Everyone laughs at Arrested Development, but this laugh was creepy, and it was high, and then got low. A moment later there was a banging on my door. I opened it and a man started shouting at me. I had no idea what he was saying, and then he barged into my flat. He walked over the balcony, one I had never even bothered to open, and started shouting stuff at me. I walked over, and even though it was locked up, it was flooded. An outside tap was fully turned on, and the water was pouring all down the side of the building. He had to go and get a key. Turns out he was maintenance, opened the balcony and turned the tap off. It took a while as the tap had been twisted so tight it was stuck. In the background, Boromir just laughed. The second time I heard this laugh, I wasn't alone. Another foreign teacher from Holland was sitting with me. We were both drinking whiskey and listening to music, when suddenly the laugh began again. We watched as the knob of the stereo turned on its own, first all the way up, then all the way down. At the time I didn't make a connection with the laughing and the weirdness. We were both pretty unnerved. One night I brought a girl back with me. She was scared of birds, so I put Boromir in his cage and covered it with a thick blanket. We went to bed. I closed the bedroom door and she got a headache, and we went to sleep. I could hear the bird laughing through the cage and through the wooden door. We woke up to banging on the door. This time it was the bedroom door. Someone was in my apartment. The girl started to panic, in ways that only girls do when there's an intruder, so I grabbed something heavy and went over to the door and pulled it open. At first I thought there was no one there, but then I looked down. Reuploading was at my feet staring silently. The girl didn't come back. At this point I decided the bird had to go. I put it back in the cage and found a friend who'd said he'd take it. The final night before he left, I was in bed, and I heard the laugh again. It filled me with dread, and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I fell asleep, and woke up in my bedroom to the door slamming. And I woke up. There was someone in my room. She was speaking to me in a very hurried fashion, but there was no sound. She wasn't like the scary Lincoln lady. She was scared. She ran out of my room and I followed, hitting as many light switches as possible, and then she was gone. The birdcage was empty, but I could hear the laughter coming from my bedroom. I went back in, and sitting on the top of the lamp was Reuploading. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I took him to my friend's place. I had told him everything honestly, as I'm not that much of an idiot, but he was still eager to have the bird. And this is the part of the story that seems the most far-fetched, but I swear down it happened. I gave the bird to my friend, and as I was about to leave, a little voice in my head said, "I miss you." In the end, the bird escaped from my friend's house a few months after that, and was never heard from again. Probably for the best. Let me take you back 10 years or so. It's 2 a.m, not a breath of sound, and I sit at the dinner table under a single light bulb eating frosted flakes. I'm the only soul in the entire house. The family is gone, and the doors are all locked. I feel tired, but the cereal is delicious. When suddenly the light bulb flickers. Weird. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, back on, no problem. At least I can finish. That's when, not 4 feet away, the back door opens. Several things happened at that precise moment, and if you were able to capture it in slow motion, it would have looked like this. Milk and cereal splashing and scattering across the table. A spoon clinks on the floor. I have discovered the secret to human flight, and my body floats effortlessly 4 feet off the ground. My chair tumbles backward beneath me, but I give no heed. My mouth is open in horror, unable to make a noise. My eyes are locked on the door. The door! It swings open to the fullest amount, but all I see is this blackness outside. When my feet touch the ground, I sprint several feet backwards and catch my breath. The door frame is still empty. Nothing appears to have moved. I don't feel any wind and I can't hear anything. What the hell? After I gather my courage, I investigate. The door handle is locked, but it must not have clicked completely when it was shut. I figure the house must have had some pressure change somewhere. And, I don't know, suction did it. Yeah, that must be it. And the light bulb? It died, I think, a few days after. So, here's me hoping it was just random chance. I hope. I'm a 23-year-old, somewhat physically fit male, who, unfortunately, has had his fair share of experiences in physical altercations through the years. I'm not that tall, maybe 5'9", weigh around 180 pounds, and while I'm not the most physically imposing guy out there, I do have a pretty broad frame. The reason I bring all of this up is because some people may think a guy may not be able to relate to many of the experiences shared, like girls being stalked or harassed. However, this isn't the case. I was scared to death this night, and I felt the need to share it with all of you. The events of this story occurred while I was approximately 16 years old and in high school. I'm now 23 and attending university,
to become a physical therapist. My life over the past 7 years between the time this event occurred and my life now have been chaotic, to say the least. I am a recovering drug addict, and I abused opiates and cocaine for 4 years before getting clean 21 months ago and getting my life straight. Because of this fact, I don't have the best memory of that time period. However, I will do my absolute best to recall everything to the finest detail my mind can muster. Nothing will be exaggerated, and if anything is murky, I will either let you know or omit it. But now, without further ado, let's begin. I live in the deep south and went to high school in a small to medium-sized town with roughly 30 to 50k people. Because the town is not the greatest size, there were not very many things to do on weeknights or weekends either, for that matter. This was before I got into the big partying phase. I was 16, and at that age you can choose between going to the movies, browsing the mall, going bowling, having dinner somewhere, or going to Broad Street, which is the main street in downtown that is a historical site and has a lot of shops and restaurants and stuff on it. Pretty much like a main street in most towns that actually have them. In high school, going out there and just walking it, or going to see the fountain or the bridges that go over many rivers in the town behind it, were popular things to do. The bridges over the rivers were also very popular for teenagers to smoke pot or to just hang out and talk. These bridges were very dimly lit and were very barely wide enough for a car to drive over. There were no cars allowed back there anyway. This place was strictly for scenery or walking your dog or whatever. Well, one night a few of my friends and I went back there to hang out and waste a Friday night. I didn't smoke pot, and there was another friend of mine there who didn't either. His name was Zach. So while my friends started smoking, Zach and I decided to just take a walk over the hill and check out the other bridges on the other side. We probably walked a good half mile to a mile away from them, to the point where if we screamed at them, or if they screamed at us, neither would hear. Also, because we traveled over other hills, and the distance we traveled, we couldn't see our friends or anyone else for that matter. It was a cool autumn night, and exceptionally dark out. I remember it being one of the darkest nights in living memory. Not especially cloudy, but there was no moon, or perhaps it was just incredibly dim. Being in the area we were in, so far from Broad Street, and our friends didn't help either. The only lights we had were the very dim ones of the bridge. Zach and I were just standing there looking at the river flow gently beneath us, getting ready to head back to the others when we saw two silhouettes growing larger and larger towards us. It wasn't uncommon for people to walk their dogs back here, even at the later hours of the night. I believe it was around 11 p.m, and it also wasn't uncommon for other people to just be doing what we were doing. After all, that's what the place was built for. So at this point we aren't particularly frightened or anything. Personally, I didn't think anything of it, and at this point we had been gone for at least half hour, and assumed they would be finished, so we started to walk back, disregarding the dark figures, which we could now see in our peripheral vision. As we walked, we heard a sharp, loud whistle. One of those that people make by putting two fingers in their mouths and blowing. I still have no idea how to do it. So we turned around and looked. It was the two other silhouettes, now submerged under the revealing light of the bridge. "Y'all come on over here for a minute now, boys." There were two middle-aged men, one slightly taller than me and the other significantly taller. They were large dudes, both with completely shaved heads, bald as could be, and I'll never forget the way their eyes looked. The only way to describe them is crazy. Methed out possibly, maybe crack. They were absolutely delusional. Both were tattooed on their faces and the rest of their body, that we could see anyway, which wasn't much because they were both wearing long black leather trench coats. The shorter of the two was holding a brown paper bag. You can tell when a brown paper bag has alcohol or some sort of bottle in it, yet this didn't. I have no idea what was in the bag. The guys began asking us a lot of questions, very personal, scary questions, and they were both quite obviously neo-Nazis, identifiable by the shaved head and swastika tattooed on their faces. They would ask Zach and me things like, "Do you love your race, boy? Would you do anything for someone of your race? You ain't got no dirty blood in you, do you? Any poison running in your veins?" When confronted in a situation like this with two drug-induced, delusional, presumably killers interrogating you, you pretty much tell them everything that they want to hear. "Oh yes sir, very proud to be white. No sir, everyone in my family for generations has been white." I noticed Zach wasn't speaking. He was even more nervous than I was. Zach was raised by a white family, but he looked suspiciously of Native American descent. I often questioned if he was adopted. They questioned Zach more and more, but I stood there and told them that he was my brother, and he was indeed white. After we had convinced them of our racial heritage, they were satisfied that we were white. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, and they would let us go. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. For you to understand why we just didn't tell these two lumps to piss off, we have to go and then run, I should explain to you that the shorter of these two men had what appeared to be a 9mm pistol. I could be mistaken about the caliber, but it was unmistakably a pistol, hanging slightly out of the opening between his jacket pocket in the front. However, that wasn't even our main concern. With every gesture the larger man made while he spoke, he slung around a large knife in his hand, almost as if he had forgotten it was there. It was so casual. It wasn't a pocket knife. It was too large to be. It looked like one of those really large 9 to 10-inch blade knives they sell at convenience stores with dragons on the handle for $20. "We aren't from here. We're traveling soldiers for the white race," he explained. He told us they were from the state directly above mine, and they were here to purge the unclean. While the second round of conversation and questioning was going on, an elderly couple, maybe in their 50s to 60s, walked less than 40 yards away from us walking their dog. We all just stopped talking and looked at them. In my head, I'm begging them to please call the cops, and I'm giving them that rescue us look with my eye. They got past us, put their heads down and picked up the pace. It was at this point that the scariest part of my night happened. The shorter one took out his gun, casually. He made my friend Zach and I remember his phone number and remember the name of their army, stating they had a full team of snipers with their sights aimed at our heads right now, if we were unable to do so. Obviously there were no snipers on the rooftops, but don't ask me what his logical reasoning were behind this. People in drug-induced manias don't generally have the best logic nor reasoning. I know personally. The man said it a couple of times and gave me 30 seconds to memorize it. It was an out-of-state number, so a bit more difficult to naturally memorize it, and the name of their terrorist organization was something ridiculously confusing as well. Perhaps it was just the circumstances, but it was the scariest 30 seconds of my life. Remember and repeat and live. Screw up one number and potentially get shot dead on the spot. Obviously not by a team of snipers, but the very real threat was standing right in front of me. The time was up. I repeated back, praying to a God I don't believe in that it was correct. It was, and after repeating it back, they sent us on our way. We immediately took off running back to our friends who were no longer there because of the amount of time we'd been gone. We explained to them what happened and called the police. They weren't out there, and searched the place, but the two men were gone. The number they'd given me didn't exist. No one had ever heard of their group. As far as I know, nothing came of it. They perhaps were only just drifting in our town. It was the single most frightening night of my entire life, and that is saying something. So please, racist, bigoted, ugly, idiotic scumbags, low-in-the-dirt neo-Nazis. Let's never meet again. This happened when I was at university. There was a society dedicated to mountain hiking, and I signed myself up straight away. It had always been a passion of mine. My father used to take me hiking from a young age. We had a transceiver radio in our clubroom. We would check it regularly to see if people were doing okay on their hikes. One of the club members piped up and said, "Hey guys, I'm pretty sure I'm getting an SOS transmission here. What do I do?" We all headed to the radio and gathered around. It was there that we heard the undeniable sound of Morse code being transmitted. The sound of dots and dashes over the crackly radio line. "That's SOS without a doubt," one of the senior members confirmed. Then he set about repositioning the antenna to determine the location of the transmission. The signal was coming from the Joetsu border, and we got permission to use the society's owned car and headed off in the direction of said signal. We didn't have enough information on the situation to call the police, or even know where they were necessarily at that point. We decided we would call them once we'd checked out the situation ourselves. Others opted to join us in their own personal vehicles too, and it took about 3 hours to coordinate the location of the signal. It was coming from a forest area beneath Mount Tanigawa. We parked the car in the parking lot at the visitor's entrance. There were only a few cars parked there as it was a weeknight. We all had a handheld radio with us to help pinpoint the exact location of the signal. We checked it periodically to make sure we were heading in the right direction. The radio started going crazy. It seemed like it was howling at one point. It usually didn't do this, so everyone was surprised. Following the leader of the group, we entered a mountain trail. It was night, and the dense tree coverage made everything dark, but we quickly found a rucksack. We searched for a while longer and discovered a body. It was too late. We got out of the area and made contact with the police. We were all understandably shaken up by this. I mean, we were only university students. We didn't want to leave the forest though. We needed to explain it to the police. None of us noticed until much later, but the radio stopped emitting the SOS signal, and of course, no one doubted that the poor soul who perished in the forest trail was the one who raised the signal. Think about it though. How could a corpse possibly do that? We had this confirmed when the police said that the hiker did not have a radio on his person. What made this even more disturbing for us was the fact that the hiker had died 2 days ago. How did no one find the body in that time on the mountain hiking trail? The police explained all of this in a follow-up meeting with our hiking society. They said that they eventually found a radio, but it was submerged in a nearby stream. So who signaled SOS? The strange thing was that there were a lot of us there, and we didn't see anyone in the area. But that's not to say that someone might have been nearby. Can you imagine someone in the woods and the shadows of it, summoning us to the grisly sight of a murder under the false pretense of an SOS to watch us discover their work? We were there late. We watched all the cars leave that parking lot, and not one was left. That might suggest that someone had taken the body there. This case is still unsolved at this point. Who the hell raised that signal? We talk about that strange night in autumn on most of our society meetings. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this very day. Let me take you back. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country, celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out, with a few too many drinks, and ended up meeting 2 guys, Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool dudes, and we were really into them. So when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the hotel room, there were 2 other men there as well, Ricky and JD, who were at least 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off, and we asked Andrew and Billy if these guys were there, and they said that they were their colleagues, as they were in the city for work, and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little too drunk and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yep. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in touch with each other. Another stupid thing. So I'd been in the bed for a while with Andrew, just talking and chilling, when he says, "I just have to pop out and be right back." I assumed he meant just out the bedroom, not the actual hotel. But he left the hotel room to grab something from Billy's hotel room. I was just watching TV in bed when the bedroom door opens, and I assumed it was Andrew, but my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with the blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you, all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you." And continued edging closer to the bed. At this point I was completely terrified, speechless, and horrified. I was frozen in fear and had no idea what to do. What a creepy thing to say. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That was until I heard JD, another random colleague, shout, "Get back in there, what are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get back in there and do what you were meant to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and DJ to get there. I was scared. I had a million thoughts running through my head and had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to escape. I decided my only option was just to leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were going pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on, grabbed my shoes and opened the door, and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey, where are you going in such a rush? Come join us and sit here right now." No thanks." I ran to the front door and tore it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but was still in a random hotel in a random city with no way to contact my friend. But I thought my best option would be to go to the lobby and wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hall, "Where are you? We know you aren't too far. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was terrified at this point and began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. It felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turn-off of the elevator, so I had to run and turn back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hall. I found the elevator, got in, and could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I could go down to the lobby and just wait there because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got there and realized there was no one in sight, not even anyone behind the desk. I sat on a couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. And I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what happened and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out fine in the end, but it could have been a lot worse. So Ricky and JD, let's never meet again.
My husband and I moved into this house in December of 2018. Ever since getting pregnant in July of 2019, I've been noticing some weird stuff. Allow me to elaborate. I hear noises constantly, or things will just fall for no reason, even if the fridge door is closed. There was this one time at 3 a.m. I had just heard something metal fall in the living room. We have cameras in some of the rooms of the house,
and my camera has night vision and texts me when the baby's crying. Sometimes I'll be outside with the baby, or not at home at all, and I'll get a text saying, "Baby crying in nursery." The night vision will blink on and off, as if the lights are flickering in broad daylight. The camera turns on its own sometimes, and our cat even disappeared in early March, and since then, my husband and I keep hearing a cat meow in various parts of the house. We've searched so profoundly, and even started pulling apart the attic on the off chance he got stuck in something, to no avail. Not to mention that my son's room stays cold 24/7. Our summers get as hot as 100 degrees, so we usually keep the AC at 74. Well, my son had this habit of kicking the blanket off at night and then waking up and crying when he got cold, so I started turning the AC off before bedtime. His room felt like 50 degrees regardless. My son, at only 1, does this weird thing where he just stops and stares at nothing, blank wall, ceiling, whatever, and then reaches out to grab the air. It happens multiple times a day, and yet only in the house. The dogs are scared to come in. I literally have to drag them in when it's too hot or too cold. They'll even curl up in a ball by the door and wait to go out shaking. Before my cat disappeared, he wouldn't really leave my son's side. He slept literally in his crib or on the edge of the rail of the crib in the dresser next to the crib. But if I would try to take the cat out of the room at night, he would attack me and return to his spot. This being the most docile cat in the world, which is why it attacking me was super strange. Recently, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door slamming shut. I usually keep it open so that I can hear my son if he wakes up. My husband works overnight, so it wasn't him. About 10 minutes later, I hear the most gut-wrenching cry and scream. I run in and pick up my son, who's shaking violently and crying. After he calmed down and fell back asleep in my lap, I looked at the camera in his room to see what had happened. He had woken up and stood up immediately, stared across the room, reached for the air, and then his whole body started trembling so hard I could see it on camera that he just starts screaming. He had nightmares before, but he usually wakes up and just lays there and cries until I pick him up. Soft cries. Nothing as scary as the ones I experienced that night. And there was once when my baby was asleep in the house in his room, and I was outside with in-laws around 11 p.m, and we all heard a baby crying loudly in the house, so we ran inside to check, but he was fast asleep. But everyone heard this, not just me. When I bring it up to my husband, he gets annoyed with me for believing in ghosts and tells me to stop. But I'm literally scared to fall asleep because the noises have started again. So tonight I had a very serious talk with my husband about everything and seriously wanting to move. The main reason being the ghost, but there are other reasons too. When I first met him, he was my supervisor. We had both transferred to the same location in the same month. We were both new, so kind of stuck together and instantly became close friends. I knew he had a girlfriend of 6 years that he had just moved there with, and I had no intentions of interfering. We were genuinely just like work friends. One day he came up to me and told me that he was done with her. He broke up with her and she was moving out. That he realized he didn't want to go home for her for the past year because he wasn't happy. But didn't realize that he was so unhappy until seeing how happy he was around me. So she moved out, and a few months later, we started dating, and bam, accidentally pregnant. But apparently when her mum came down to help her move her stuff out of the house, she had a crystal ball with her that she kept rubbing and whispering something to. She's really into brujeria. It's witchcraft in English, I think. And my husband said that's the reason it's been so cold, because he knows it's not a ghost, but pretty sure her mum to this day is holding a grudge and cursing me in some way, or the house. He just tries not to think about it, because he feels like if he feels his anger and fears it, it'll feed into it. That's why it's mostly my son that is physically affected, because apparently his ex wanted to have kids,
My husband did not want to have kids with her, as she's very manipulative, and when she found out I was pregnant, she lost her mind. Apparently, he was also worried about making me more scared or worried because he didn't want to tell me, as I have borderline disorder and I tend to overreact. But that's why he wanted to present our baby to the church despite not being religious, just in case. His dad will be by this week to bless the house. So it turns out my father-in-law was going to come and bless the house on Sunday after his church sermon, as he's a pastor. But the Friday before, he suffered a stroke. He was eating and couldn't move one side of his body. My son wakes up with nightmares still, or talks to the wall or reaches out like someone is there. I still hear baby cries in the house, even when the babies are asleep or not even home. My dogs are still terrified to enter my house. And about 2 weeks ago, our house almost caught fire. We have a small laundry room that's only big enough for the washer and dryer, and some rooms for the doors to open and close. On the top shelf above the washer is our laundry soap. One day when my kids were at Grandma's house, I was on the way to pick them up, and my husband was sleeping. He said he heard a loud thud and got up to see what it was. The washer and dryer were never on, and the soap was pushed towards the wall on the back of the shelf. But when he got up, the soap had fallen off the shelf and busted open on the washer and floor, and hit the plugs behind it, and everything started catching fire. My husband was thankfully there and was able to put it out, and immediately shut the breaker off. When I got home, the brake had been turned back on, and he swears he didn't do it, but the soap had dried, so nothing caught fire again. My father moved to Manhattan from Peru in 1970. One night during this time period, he was out at a bar with his friend Carlos, also from Peru. Sometime during the night, they were approached by a well-spoken, friendly, nicely dressed American man. He offered to buy them around, and they spent a few hours drinking and talking. After a while, the man invited them back to his apartment somewhere on the Upper East Side to keep drinking and hanging out. My father instantly and instinctively was not into this idea. But Carlos, drunk and chasing more free drinks, stupidly insisted they take him up on it. They arrive at the apartment, and after an hour or so, Carlos had passed out sitting up in the man's reclining chair. Everything had been fine, but my dad was never comfortable with the idea, and now knew it'd be even more complicated with Carlos passed out. He went to the bathroom for a minute to splash some water on his face and sober himself up. When he stepped inside, he immediately noticed a large pair of scissors in the sink. They were way larger than any normal household pair, and he compared them to something you might see in a hospital. He told me at that moment his entire body was overtaken with instinct, and something inside him made him pick up the scissors and put them in the waist of his pants behind his back. When he walked out to the living room, he found the man with his hand on Carlos's leg. He asked him what he was doing and said they were leaving now. The man told him to just relax and keep drinking, but enough was enough and my father was insistent. At this point, he said the man's face dropped, his voice lowered, and his whole demeanor changed. "You're not going anywhere," was the man's reply, as he produced a large pocket knife from a pocket of his own. Upon this, my father pulled the scissors from behind his back and locked eyes with the man. They stood tensely for a moment, as my father explained in less words, "I've got scissors and you've got a knife. If you come for me, I'm getting you too." The man, realizing the stalemate, put the knife down and said, "Get out." My dad shook Carlos awake, practically carrying him from his feet, and pushed him out the door, never taking his eyes off the man or his hand off the scissors. He said the man stood at the door and glared at them as they backed down the hallway to the elevator. So possible murderer and God knows what else in 1970s Manhattan. Let's not meet.
2 years ago, my family had our first Christmas at my grandmother's house since my great-grandfather had passed away. There was a definite somber tone to the otherwise festive gathering, as he was a big part of our family get-togethers. Fast forward a few hours into night. My uncle, who was a bit of a disturber with a twisted sense of humor, started poking fun at silly things my great-grandfather used to do. It began harmless, but of course he took it way too far and started making fun of pretty rude things, like the fact he had a hard time chewing his food near the end of his life. Pretty horrible, I know. As soon as the statement left his mouth, the craziest thing I've ever experienced happened. My grandmother has a bookshelf in the living room where we were all situated in. One of the shelves, the second one from the top, was almost a mini shrine to him. Well, everything on that shelf went flying off, literally shot across the room and fell to the floor, as if someone had thrown it. The weirdest thing was nothing on any of the other shelves were touched, just the stuff on the one dedicated to him. No one was beside the shelf and there were no windows open. Needless to say, my uncle was scared and bolted out of the room as we were all stunned. I have no logical explanation for what happened that night, but we do like to say it was our grandfather telling my uncle to smarten up one last time. I'm not sure if my mother's house is haunted. Nothing strange ever happened there except for one time. I was woken up in the middle of the night by what I thought was my little sister. No one had said anything or touched me in any way to wake me up, but there's that distinct feeling you get when you know there's someone there staring at you. You can feel their presence. Well, that is what woke me up. The presence of a little girl. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel someone there, and it felt like it could be my little sister. But whoever was there was angry. The malevolent presence of a young girl. I asked quietly, "Maddie, what are you doing here?" I got no response, but felt that angry presence. I told myself I was imagining things, but I was paralyzed with fear by this point. It was very, very angry, and it felt pretty hefty. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that it had to be my younger sister, who was absolutely furious with me or perhaps sleepwalking, and I was working myself into a fit for no reason. Then, suddenly, I was struck in the crotch. Not too hard. I turned on the light, only to find no one was standing there, and the door was shut quite tightly. Utterly confused, I went to check on my mother and my sister. They were both sound asleep. I did not go back to sleep that night. That's the only strange thing that ever happened. I don't know if it was a ghost. It could have easily been my mind playing tricks on me, even making me believe I got punched, I suppose. But it always felt like a paranormal entity to me. The following happened when I was a child. My parents and I went on a camping trip with some family friends. There was a big lake by the campsite. It was a very peaceful and secluded area. So we all put up our tents near the river and were set to camp for 2 days. When night came, my friends were talking about doing some dares. The adults overheard us and told us not to do any dares at night as it could be dangerous. Of course, we all ignored our parents' advice. The dare was to walk around the lake by yourself with no flashlight. One of my friends offered to go first. We all waited in silence as she walked off into the darkness. She came back after a while. She wasn't frightened in the slightest. Next was my turn. They urged me forward. I was nervous, and I felt the pressure of my friends. I had to do it. It was so dark. I was getting really worried. I was walking around the lake, only the sounds of nature could be heard. That is until I heard the footsteps approaching towards me. I prepared myself as best I could for whoever was coming towards me. It looked like it was one of my parents' friends. He was working with a flashlight. I knew him. I was relieved. I waved at him as he approached. He strolled towards me. He handed me something. It was a lemon candy. I thanked him. "You should eat that now," he said in a hushed voice. I told him I would eat it later and put the candy in my pocket. He was shining the torch at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. He had his hood up. "Come with me," he said, but it didn't sound normal. I said I had to go back to the tent. I thought it was weird, but he was a really nice guy, and I was enjoying the camping trip with his family and mine. When we got back to the tent, we all decided to get some sleep. I was laying in bed thinking of the candy, and that I should just thank him for it tomorrow, while I held it in my hand. In the morning, I walked over to him while he was drinking coffee and thanked him for the candy. "Lemon candy? What are you talking about? I didn't give you any candy," he said. I thought he was just teasing me, trying to trick me. After a while, I could tell he wasn't joking. He said he wasn't at the lake that night. My mum came out of the tent, who had happened to hear our conversation. It got weirder and weirder. I went back to my tent to get the lemon candy to show them. All the parents and my friends looked concerned and frightened. Who was the person I met at the lake? I threw that piece of candy into the lake as our family picked things up, and we got out of there as fast as we could. When I was 14, we were staying at the Circus Hotel in Las Vegas, which is connected via elevator to an indoor amusement park. As a bit of a preface, I get motion sick extremely easily and always have. My siblings and I rode many roller coasters, so as usual I began to feel quite nauseous. Because of this, we all went up to the hotel room to take a little break so that I could lie down for a while. Once everyone was leaving, I was still getting nauseous, so I stayed in the room for a little bit longer by myself. After about 20 more minutes of rest, I decided to return to the amusement park, since I would be on more roller coasters, and I left my phone in the hotel room. The door was automatically locking. Perfect setup. I left the room and immediately saw a man down the hall, sitting in front of a room. He glanced up from his phone and hopped up, beginning to walk towards me. He greeted me and asked where I was going, asking things like, "Do you want to come hang out with my friends in our room?" and saying, "It would be a whole lot more fun with us," and many more suggestive things. I had responded to him that I was meeting up with my family at the food court area. Let's Not Meet taught me that when in doubt, make them think someone is expecting you. Then after that, he backed off and went to sit down in front of his door. I proceeded to the elevator while he watched, and thank goodness he didn't follow. On top of this, while leaving the next day, he was in the elevator going down with my family and I was staring the whole time. Creepy as hell because I was 14 years old and a girl, and this man looked to be in his mid-20s at least. Made us extra nervous about what could have happened because of all the trafficking rings in Vegas. When I was 13, I woke up one night to the sound of children laughing out my window. I had an 11-year-old brother who had friends next door, so I thought nothing of it. It happened a couple of nights in a row, and so I told my little brother to knock it off, or I'd go all big brother on him and noogie him or something. He gave me poker face and said he could hear them too, but I figured he was being a dork. That night I heard it again. I got up and opened the window to yell at him and his friends, and all I saw out of my window was the darkest, blackest silhouette I've ever seen. There were 4 or 5 of them, about the size of a toddler. As soon as I screamed, they vanished. Dad went outside to see if he could see anything. Of course he didn't. I heard them twice since then. The first time I bailed and slept in the living room. The second time I got balls enough to look outside again, and they were there. I went all 70s horror movie preacher and held up a Bible and screamed, "In the name of the Father and the Son, I command you to leave and never return." And they never did. I'm guessing it's because they were too busy laughing at me somewhere else. I was at my grandma's house in Mexico. There's a demon my mum calls La Anima, which translates to a soul. The thing has been haunting my mum's family since they were small kids.
and they said the house was built on an old graveyard from the early 1900s. As a kid, lots of things happened that traumatized me. But the one thing that has stuck with me is a nightmare I had about her. I dreamt I was walking in my grandma's house and no one was home. Even though I knew no one was home, I felt as though someone was watching me. As I get to the backyard, I see La Anima, who's dressed in all black, but as I approach her, I can see her face. She has yellow eyes that sink into blackness, a thin, narrow, pale nose, and her mouth was something else. Her teeth were razor sharp and her gums were bleeding. As she came closer, I knelt down and started praying with a rosary in hand. She starts to cackle, and it gets louder and louder, and at this point in my dream, I know I'm dreaming and I try to focus on praying, but I can't. She finally reaches me, kneels down in front of me, and continues to laugh. I stop praying. I look up at her, and she straight up says, "That's not going to help you," and continued laughing. I looked down at the rosary. It was gone. So was she. Fast forward to a few years later. My uncle and I were talking about La Anima, and he started talking about a nightmare he had. As he's talking, I realized we both had the same nightmare. It's crazy, but I never told anyone about that dream.
This happened when I was in school. It was the summer break. I always loved going to see my cousins during the time off school. My family and I went to visit them, as they only lived in the next city over. I was really looking forward to seeing my cousin. He was a little bit older than me, but he was always up for playing games. Unfortunately, he wasn't always around, so I had to play alone. I didn't mind playing alone since my cousin's house backed onto a forest with a small mountain. It was so great. There was always fun to be had, like looking for bugs, and I decided to go exploring. I really wanted to go to the top of the mountain by myself, so I set my sights on the summit and started marching uphill. But then I noticed a dirt path leading off to the side. I was curious to see what might be there. That's when I noticed there was an abandoned-looking house down there. I immediately thought this would be an awesome place to make a base. My cousin would love it, so I decided to get a bit closer to check it out. I was so excited that I had found it. I crept up close to the exterior of the house and peeked through a broken window to see what was inside. I saw something so weird it will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was all decayed in there, but there was a chair that looked brand new. In front of the chair were these life-size cardboard cutouts of famous people. The way they had been placed made me think someone had deliberately set them up around the chair. There was a baseball player cutout, an anime one, and an actress. The way they were positioned around the chair, it was as if they were in conversation with one another. Looked as if it could have been easy for someone in the chair to be the center of attention. The house was a mess. Broken glass, chipped and damaged walls, but the chair and the cutouts were new. It was kind of off-putting. My gut told me that something was wrong here, so I decided to get back to my cousin's house. My skin went cold despite the hot summer's day. Something innate had awoken in me and was telling me to leave immediately. I began to scramble up backwards towards the mountain path, and that's when I noticed something in the house. I had gotten up the dirt road a bit, and I had a more aerial view of the cardboard cutouts in the house, and one of them stood out to me. It was moving by itself. For some reason I didn't run. It was fascinated, and I stood there watching it, cold sweat amassing my brow, unsure what exactly I was witnessing. I looked closer. My heart paused for a moment when I realized that there was a man hiding behind the cutout. I could see his arms and legs, but not his face. As soon as I figured it was a man, I ran as fast as I could back to my cousin's house, because I was young, and I didn't understand what had happened, or if I would be in trouble. So I decided to keep this incident to myself. If I hadn't noticed the man in there, or my gut instinct was off that day. I might not be alive to tell this story. Who knows? I was so close to walking in there. Now that I am older, I've had time to think about how strange the situation was. What was the purpose of the cutouts? Were they there to lure people? Did the man tell naive people or children that they could meet celebrities if they followed him into the house in the woods? And then, what would he have done to them? I still think about this from time to time. I heard this story from a girl who used to work as an international flight attendant on a famous Eastern airline. She swears that this is real. When the airplane's crew land on a country they don't live in, they go to a hotel where they usually spend the night before the next flight. The girl told me that the crew loved to say that the hotels they stayed in were haunted. It wasn't different with that specific hotel that they were staying in Malaysia. She didn't care much though. However, when it was around 3 a.m, she woke up to find a man in her room. Because she was still sleepy, she didn't care much, just told him to get out. The man ran to the door, opened it and left immediately. She got up and went to the bathroom, finally realizing how creepy it was, what had just happened. Hotels usually have safety lock doors inside the rooms for guests to use, but hers were broken, so she wasn't able to use it. A few months later, she ended up having to go to that same travel route and spend the night at that hotel again. This time she was able to use the safety lock and went to sleep. Again, in the middle of the night, she woke up and noticed someone was messing with her doorknob trying to get in. She woke up again totally frozen and unable to do anything. She waited for a few minutes that seemed like an eternity until the person finally gave up and left. On the flight back, she told the other crew members about her creepy experience. They seemed to believe her and told her that another girl from the airline experienced that in the hotel as well. The second girl was also spending the night there after a very long flight. When she woke up in the morning to get dressed and leave with the rest of the crew, she realized she couldn't find her work shoes. She looked everywhere in the room but couldn't find them. That was a very strange thing considering she barely had any luggage. She went to the hotel's hall where the rest of the crew was, waiting for her, to tell them she couldn't find her shoes. Some people went back to the room with her to help her look. After a while, one of them asked, "Have you looked inside the safe box?" She was like, "No, I didn't even touch it," since she obviously didn't need to use it. They opened it and found her shoes in there along with a piece of paper. Weirdly enough, they opened it, and on it was written, "It was fun to watch you sleep."
I've never experienced anything paranormal myself, but my family has plenty of stories to share. This one took place sometime during the mid-1950s. My grandma came from a very poor family in Mexico. Her house was more like a shack, with a dirt floor. Every morning my great-grandmother would send her two eldest daughters, my grandma is the third born, to go to the woods to collect water from the river to bring back so the family could use it for washing, drinking or cooking. The second sister didn't tag along this particular morning, so it was up to the eldest sister to do the honor. The walk to the river was about 2 miles or so. She gets there and sees a long, black-haired girl playing with a stick, tapping it against the flowing water. The girl had her back to my grandma's sister. She didn't see too many people come to the area, so she tried striking up a conversation with the girl. The girl didn't answer her or even turn her back to acknowledge her. My grandma's sister shrugs it off and approaches the river to collect the water. When she got closer, the girl turns away slowly to face my grandma's sister. And my grandma's sister immediately sees that the girl has no face, just skin replacing the eyes, the nose and lips. She didn't really have a chin either, it was sort of just rounded off. Immediately my grandma's sister dropped the bucket and fled the scene, running the whole 2 miles, and she refused to ever do that chore again.
In 2018, my secondary school class went on a trip to Poland for a few days. Our flight was at 7:30 a.m, so by the time we got to the airport and on the plane, we were pretty much all exhausted. We arrived at the airport in Poland a few hours later, and as school trips go, we were immediately roped into a tour around the town for another few hours. As you can imagine, by the end of it, most of us could barely walk, so we eventually made our way to our hotel at around 4 p.m. Let me tell you, this hotel was probably in the creepiest place you could imagine. It was down this little alleyway that if you were in the dark, you wouldn't be able to see a thing. As well as this, there was a train track right beside our hotel, and every 20 minutes a train would pass by, which honestly terrified most of us as we weren't used to it and weren't aware that it was even there. Anyway, once we had checked into the hotel, we were finally allowed to get some sleep for a few hours before we headed out for the night. All of us were around 17 to 18, so we were allowed to head out on our own. When we headed out that evening, that's when things started to go wrong. In order for us to get to the town square, we had to cross through this little park. Now, you may think that it isn't that big of a deal, but trust me, it was. There were several beggars in this park, and they would constantly come over to us rambling in Polish in what I could believe was them asking for money. The one thing that we were told when we arrived there was to never give anyone money, as it would only result in more people expecting to be given something. So we continued on quickly through the park and headed to the town square. We spent a few hours in and out of bars and restaurants, checking out the town until about 11. As you can imagine, it was pitch black at this point, so we started making our way back to the hotel. We again made our way through the park, but this time nobody bothered to approach us. We were surprised that they had given up so easily, but we continued on until we got back to the hotel. We had barely stepped inside the hotel lobby when one of the girls in our group started screaming, pushing her way through us all to get upstairs. When we looked back, we saw what her problem was. We saw that one of the beggars from the park had followed us, this large burly man who looked as though he could kill all of us if he wanted to. However, that wasn't the thing that creeped me out the most. It was his face. The man was simply standing there smiling at us, not in a friendly way, if you catch my drift. The girls screamed and had eventually gotten the attention of our teachers upstairs, prompting them to run down to see what the hell was going on. When they saw the man, they literally ushered us all inside, yelling for the hotel receptionist to get out there. Luckily, the receptionist managed to get the man to leave after he threatened to call the police. What creeps me out the more I think about it is the fact that this man was able to follow us back all the way to our hotel without any of us even noticing. I can tell you now, that was the first and last time I ever went on a school trip abroad. This story goes to show, always be aware of your surroundings, especially in an unfamiliar setting.
In the first year we moved to our new house, our nanny said that someone was copying my older sister. She said that she saw my older sister sitting by her bed, but that my sister was still in school, so it was a bit kind of creepy. Here's my experience, though. I saw my younger sister walk into our parents' room, and I assumed that she was going in there to use their bathroom, and me being the funny one in the family decided that I would scare her. So I walked stealthily and got inside the bathroom, then screamed so that she would be frightened. But no one was there. The second time that I saw my younger sister's doppelganger was when I was on my phone minding my own business, when all of a sudden in the corner of my eye, I saw the head of my younger sister pop out behind my bedroom door to see what I was doing. Of course, I ignored her, thinking that she was just being silly, but she did it again. Her head popped out behind the door, and I got annoyed, so I chased after her and thought that she went to my parents' room, but of course, no one was there. She had been downstairs the whole time, and I would have heard her go down the stairs.
This happened back in high school. I was on a class trip with the band, and the last stop was in the deep south. Not realizing the long drive there, we spent all day on the buses. We were cooped up and exhausted from the travel. At check-in, many of us noted the atmosphere was sketchy. There was no lobby, just a glorified alley. The pool was empty and filled with tarps and cinder blocks. Seeing all of this in the daytime may not have been as bad, but under the cover of darkness and the squint of sleepy eyes, it almost made us concerned. Trying to be a good guy, I walked a friend and her roommates to their room a few floors above mine. We chatted and did goodnight hugs before they entered the key card in the lock. The door to their room was abruptly opened, and there was a boy a few years younger than us answering the door. My friends sheepishly said, "I'm sorry, I thought this was our room," and it actually was. The young boy looked at her, mutters a disappointed, "Oh," and collapses to the floor. One of the roommates and I immediately take off. The lone elevator was clogged with fellow students going to their assigned rooms, so we jumped down the 5 flights of stairs past the others, too impatient to wait for the lift. We reach the ground floor and run across to the lobby. Our teacher/band instructor and some chaperones are present, as we say a kid passed out on the hotel floor. Front desk says they'll send someone up. With my adrenaline pumping, the roommate and I ascended those same flights of stairs to tell everyone to wait for help. We stood waiting by a room we thought had a fresh corpse. Turns out the young kid was a runaway who broke in for a place to sleep. He was diabetic and had just suffered the effects of drinking too much Pepsi. We were zombies the next morning thanks to fear keeping us awake all night. It was a long ride home.
A little backstory. I was around 11 years old when my grandmother passed away. My parents both worked early in the morning, and she was the one who usually put my brother and I on the bus. We lived in the country, and so the bus came to our houses. I don't know why my brother wasn't home with me this particular morning, but I was getting on the bus myself. Anyway, I had gotten up and dressed and everything by myself with no problems and nothing weird. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was over a century old, and creaking sounds in the house were nothing out of the ordinary. But when I went downstairs, it felt different. I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway stairs. I was trying to watch for the bus and figure out who else was home, when suddenly the footsteps started at the far end of the house and ran down the hall all the way to the stairwell, where a male voice called my name. It was familiar, but not anyone in my family. So I went to the foot of the stairs and walked about halfway up and turned to look at the top of the stairs, afraid of what I would see. And there was no one there, but the sound of footsteps running back up the hall, and the feeling that someone had just been standing there was enough for me to run outside and wait for the bus out there. I have plenty of other stories growing up in a mildly haunted house, but this was the only time that it ever spoke to me. The grandmother I referenced previously got a kitten when I was young, probably 5 or so. She was white with bright blue eyes and a black spot at the base of her tail. They called her Princess, and I loved her. After both my grandparents had passed away, as my grandpa passed less than 2 years after my grandma, we took care of her. We didn't move her out of their house because we were going to move in, and we were working on going through what was left in the house beforehand. It didn't make sense to move her if we were still going to be there every day. Fast forward to moving day, the night before my first day of school in 7th grade. My parents, brother and I all grabbed our pillows and blankets and went down the road to our new house to officially move in. I was the first one through the door and was uncomfortably greeted by the sight of Princess laying dead on the floor. It appeared that she had a heart attack mid-stride, and she landed perfectly on a small decorative pillow that, according to my mum, hadn't been there when she had been in the house earlier that afternoon. I was traumatized. I hadn't fully grieved for my grandparents, and now their cat, who I saw as a physical connection to them, was gone too. It was rough. Fast forward several years and I'm 16 now. My family didn't get another cat. My dad didn't like them, and we had 4 dogs at the time. I'm laying in bed one night trying to fall asleep, and I feel the daintiest footsteps on my bed. You must understand that I've slept with my bedroom door closed for my entire life, and the footsteps were too light to be any of our dogs, but they started by my feet and walked up next to my legs, and finally I felt what seemed to be a cat curled up and laying down right at my stomach. I didn't want to move because I didn't know what was going on, but after a while the weight seemed to just lift away. I didn't feel movement, it just got lighter, and when I looked down nothing was there. But I know that it was Princess coming to cuddle for a little while. That is the one and only time I've experienced anything like that, and I've never heard of anyone else having a similar experience.
This happened when I was in high school. My friends and I were all camping together deep in the forest. We had just finished dinner, and we were cleaning up, joking around, when I heard a huge thud. By the expressions on my friends' faces, I was certain they had heard it as well. It sounded as if something had fallen out by our tent. It was dark, so we grabbed some flashlights and went in search of the source of the thud. There was something big and white laying on the ground. It looked like an animal. We were freaking out. We shone our torches at it from a distance. The more we looked at it, the more it looked like a body. A human body. He seemed to have fair or balding hair, and as we approached, we noticed something was wrong. His limbs were bent at impossible angles. We rushed in, realizing the gravity of the situation, and as soon as we got close enough to have a good look, we knew it wasn't a human, but it was as big as. It was a mannequin. Where the hell did it come from? Did someone throw that at us? We scanned the area with our torches, and no one was around. We didn't even hear footsteps or anything when it happened. We were camping, deep in the forest, and didn't see anyone else for the whole day. One of our friends decided to be a watchman, while the rest of us packed up as fast as we could. We got the hell out of there, leaving that creepy mannequin lying face down in the dirt.
My dad passed away when I was finishing undergrad. My baby brother was in junior year of high school, and I was the executor of his estate. He didn't have a will, and brother was obviously a minor, so it made things difficult. So one night I go to this old bookstore called Vaughn's that he loved to get a quote for his Stephen King collection. While they're going through everything, I walk around. There's a basement chock full of books, and I walk down there, and there's no one else around. It must have been about 8:30 or so, and when I enter, a book falls off the shelf. Immediately I feel a presence, but also this invisible sort of trail that I'm trying to follow. So I walk through the rows, thinking and just follow this trail until it leads to the sci-fi section. Here I get an overwhelming reassurance that my dad is in front of me. So I'm standing there and say to myself, okay, I'm open, receptive, let me hear. Forget the house. It blows me away. I've not even thought about the house of his that my brothers and I are trying to get baby bro through school in. So I have this little back and forth with myself about how I'm not going to quit and fight, yada yada. So I walk along and go to where the book fell, where I first entered the basement, and I pick it up. It's a book titled Teaching Your Children to Live Without You. That was it. It sent chills down my spine. I go upstairs, grab his books, say thank you and leave. When I get home, I open the mailbox and there's a letter from the bank demanding the full outstanding mortgage in 30 days. The sheriff came after the 30 days had elapsed and kicked my 17-year-old brother out, called him a low-down piece of crap, and then they sold it and made $130K. And it took me 3 years of being my own lawyer to sue the city to claim the estate equity in the property. I'm currently reading through all of my old diaries from ages 11 to 22.
I came across a night in question in the middle of an entry. When I was 12, my mum couldn't find a sitter for a late night meeting, so I had to go along with her, with my younger brother and a friend, Mac. We had to keep to ourselves. It was in a church at night. Naturally, a cemetery in the back was where we decided to play. My entry goes that we were in the cemetery in the dark. I screamed and hid behind a gravestone to scare them. My brother taught us a ritual to bring out spirits. You stand on a gravestone, say, "May rise" 10 times, and I stood on about 6 different stones and did them. Then I was standing on one, and Mac and my brother were facing me. Mac saw something walk towards them and then run. I saw a black something that was hunched over going behind a tree. My brother saw it too. Then we were up near the church, and I was able to stare at one right next to the tree. I stared for a while. It was moving its head a lot, then it waved at me. Even Mac saw it too. Mac then said run. But I was left standing on the stone facing my brother, Mac and the church, and a wooded area to the right. Mac said that he saw a tall robed person standing behind a stone after at the back of the cemetery. While we were making out what they were seeing, it appeared to be a few rows closer. They screamed and pulled me off the grave. I fell on my stomach and looked up to see my brother running towards the church spotlight, and I followed. I was computing what I thought was a hunched, robed person walking behind a tree within the woods next to our church. At the same time, they were absorbed in the figure behind me. It was very odd. I also want to point out that I completely forgot about the part where we stood under the light and stared at one next to the tree. All 3 of us stood there in silence for at least a few minutes, and I remember watching its head rotate around the shoulders like a pinwheel so fast it became blurry. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. My grandfather lives in a mountainous area of the Miyazaki prefecture. I used to visit him every summer vacation. It was really great. I loved playing in the river by his house, going fishing amongst other things. The summer in question, I had been in the river swimming for about an hour. I started to get cold, so I got out and sat on one of the jutting cliff rocks above the river. I loved it because it was like my own private river, where we never usually had people around. But on that day, I took notice of 2 children about 200 meters away. Even though they were quite far, I was sure that they were elementary school kids like me. I didn't know that there was a school in the area. The only school I knew about was now in ruins. I didn't know about any other kids my age in the area either. It wasn't exactly well populated. They disappeared off in another direction, and I thought I'd better get going soon, as my parents would be looking for me. I was drying myself off and changing back into my clothes when I noticed something nailed to a nearby tree. It was a laminated photo with some text below it. The photo was of a woman and 2 children on either side of her, who appeared to be their mother. Below the photo was only one line of text: "I am looking for these children." I was a bit put off. I felt a bit creeped out by the poster in the mountainous woods. The strangest thing about the poster was the fact that the mother's face had been scribbled over with a black magic marker. The children's faces had been circled in a red marker. Why would the mother's face be blacked out? Surely she would want to be identified if she was the one looking for the children. Something didn't sit right with me about that poster. Weirder still, one of the kids in the poster had a unique hairstyle which made him recognizable. And one of the kids that I saw by the lake today had the same hairstyle. Close, cropped, shaven hair. Things were weird, and I wanted to leave the area. So I jogged back to my grandfather's house and asked him about the weird poster. He didn't know anything about any missing kids. Strange. The village he lives in is small and close-knit, so the fact that he didn't hear anything about missing kids was certainly surprising. Something seemed wrong. Later in the year, my family went to visit my grandfather again to ring in the new year. He was having a drink and the poster came up in conversation. He said he found something similar to the poster. I was interested but a bit creeped out remembering it. He passed a piece of paper to me. I wondered why he saved it. I was quite curious now. It was the same poster as last time, except this time there was something written over the photo. The word found, in bright red ink. I was really creeped out by this. I took it to the local temple and the priest said a prayer, just in case. I have no idea if this poster is an innocent thing, or something far more sinister. All I know is the kids looked like they were hiding, and there is something dark about the situation. Who puts up a poster in the middle of the woods looking for children without asking the locals, and blacking out their mother's picture? Who did they think would see the poster in the woods? Was their mother looking for them? Was it someone else? Were they kids of some cult escapees? I think about this from time to time. I think there might be something going on at that mountain. This happened last year. I traveled for work and was in Atlanta. I'm no dumbass when I travel and I make sure all the locks on the door are secured at night and always take note of my surroundings. The usual. I usually wake up to pee at least once before my alarm goes off. So this morning I woke up around 5 to pee and then immediately go back to my hotel bed. Always a gamble when I get out of bed. I'll always be able to instantly fall back asleep or not. And this time round I was laying there for a while trying to doze back. A solid half hour passed and I was starting to drift back to sleep when I thought I heard my door jiggle. When you're on the brink of sleep and have these weird half dreams? Just figured it was that. But then I heard it again. I shot up out of bed, and without a doubt I saw a shadow of someone standing on the other side of the door. The door jiggled once or twice, and then I saw the shadow move away. I jumped out of bed and looked through my peephole and caught the quickest glimpse of a silhouette turn a corner out of sight. Safe to say, I did not sleep after that, and turned my lights on and turned on the TV for comfort. Really creepy. Maybe it was a drunk idiot, but at 5:30 a.m.? I don't know, man. Always keep your doors locked.
One night I woke up to something settling over my face. Initially I thought it was my bed covers, but then I realized it all felt wrong and reached up and grabbed the cloth and threw it. I reached over to turn on my bedside light and froze because of what I saw. All of my clothes, which previously had been folded neatly in a basket, were now stacked atop of me, neck to toe. The piece of cloth that was setting over my face was a pair of my son's shorts, so of course I froze and listened for whoever was in my home. I stayed that way for about 10 minutes hearing nothing, so I got up and started to search the house. The only person that lived with me was my 8-year-old son, and I found him fast asleep in his top bunk. I know he didn't stack those clothes, because the bunk he was in was metal and very squeaky, and he would have definitely made noise getting in or out. He's a pretty serious kid, and I've never known him to play tricks. In any case, I felt that last piece go over my face, so I know he wasn't there for that. I searched the entire house and no one was there but us. I believe it was poltergeist activity. Apparently stacking is typical of what poltergeists do. I also found a random puddle of water once in the middle of the living room when no one had been home. There was no place the water could have come from either. Very strange stuff.
I used to work in a small bed and breakfast / hotel in England. I don't want to say where specifically to not give away the location, as the story I'm about to share is relatively famous within our town. In any case, here we go. I worked there for about 5 years, and all of this kicked off on the 3rd year that I worked there. We hired a new guy called Max. He was supposed to be part of our night shift crew, which involved him. Just him, for the most part. There would be some overlay when staff would come and go, but for the most part he would be the one covering the desk at nights. This was an important, but usually quiet role, and as he was relatively new, we thought it would be best to train him on this one, and then eventually migrate him over to the day shift, and when he was working both adequately, rotate him around where needed. That's when things started to go a bit askew. One morning I turn up to work, relieve Max, I'm getting my regular slew of checkouts, when a woman comes up to me complaining that she hadn't slept well at all. She felt as though someone had been staring at her all night. When she looked up, she saw a shadow in the hallway, and eventually she just passed out again, assuming it was a shadow person or an episode of sleep paralysis. I found her tale entertaining but tall. People have claimed that our B&B is haunted, but I have never believed in it once. I assumed this was just one of these ghost tales, as you do, but said my part that we were very sorry and we hoped she enjoyed her stay, which she said generally she did, and went on with our lives. A few weeks later, I got another strange report. This time, it was a missing video camera. I should probably mention that this happened a good number of years ago, back when video cameras were still in use. The couple were very confused. They said the video camera was brand new, and told me that they had had it the night before looking at family videos, and that if we find it, or anything like that, to please let them know. Again, this was something that they told me in the day, and they insisted they were using it the night before, so they weren't suspicious of the cleaners or anything like that. How could anyone get into their room, and then even if they did, only steal the camera and then leave? It seems far-fetched. I assume that they just misplaced it, and they never returned after to tell me that they couldn't find it or did, so I assumed that they probably just left it under, a sheet or some clothes or something, and had forgotten to inform me, or maybe just informed a colleague. In any case, I had forgotten about this strange incident. But the third thing that happened really is what blew the lid. You see, on this particular night, I had to work a little bit longer, as there was some important paperwork that needed to be done. I was sitting in the back office, right at the back of the hotel, while Max was at the front desk at the very front. I didn't bother telling him I was there, as another girl was relieving him that day, so I assumed that he never knew I was in the hotel at all. At about midnight, I was just about done, exhausted, and relieved I didn't have to work the next day. I was packing my bag and making my way out. I go out through the front entrance because that's where my car's parked, and I go just to say a quick bye to Max and make sure he's doing his job, when he wasn't there. I give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was filling in a request, but he hadn't left the Be Back in 5 card that we're supposed to do while we're not there. That was weird, I thought. I decided I'd just put the papers away in the car and come back in a few minutes to make sure everything was alright, and that he hadn't, slipped or something. I put my papers away and trod back to the hotel, dreaming of chicken nuggets I wouldn't be able to eat until tomorrow afternoon. As I was making my way over, I looked up at the hotel and saw a single light on the 4th floor. As I made my way in, Max was still not at the desk, and thought to maybe call him up on his mobile phone. But as I went to the back counter, I saw that his mobile phone was there, charging. Weird, I thought. So I decided to snoop around. Maybe he was cleaning up in the back. Maybe he was doing a request which we're supposed to note down on a piece of paper, but there was nothing as such there. So, after looking around and not finding him, I thought I'd wait a few minutes, because if he wasn't doing the job, as the manager, this was now my responsibility. So, even more pissed and my headache growing in my head, I sat off to one side on one of the sofas, just waiting for his return. About 6 minutes passed, when I heard someone running down the hallway. It was a woman in her pajamas, and she looked furious. She yelled at me and said if I was the manager. I said I was, good thing I was there as well, and asked what was wrong and if there was anything I could do to help. She just burst into tears before she could get out what she wanted to say. But after consoling her and making sure that she was alright, did she relay to me the following information. She had gone to bed quite late that night and was tossing and turning and for some reason couldn't sleep when she heard a door creak gently. She didn't move, scared, and then she heard the shuffling of feet and the door quietly clicking into place. She slowly turned around but kept her eyes closed, terrified, and that's when she saw someone standing in the dark. She knew someone was coming into her room but had no idea who. In a moment of panic, she quickly opened her eyes and with her fist smashed the light switch which was right next to her bed. The moment the lights came on, the person was illuminated. It was a man, disheveled, mid-20s. The description fit that of Max. What really sealed the nail in the coffin was the fact that he was wearing a hotel uniform, and he was rummaging through her handbag that was over by the desk near the entrance. She screamed, and the man ran out without another word. She screamed and tried to follow him, but he got the elevator, so she just ran down the stairs. When she came down, she found me, and I was absolutely horrified. Then it clicked. The things that I'd been told about these last few months, and even some things that some employees had offhandedly mentioned previously, about people seeing shadows in the hallways, other people saying they'd missed their belongings or misplaced them. But, for a hotel this is quite common, so we get this a lot. I never connected that it could be one of our employees stealing. It was disgusting. The woman was terrified and said that she wanted that guy sacked and called the police. The police found Max hiding on the roof. I don't know what he was doing there, but the game was up. He eventually confessed that he went into rooms for thrills and that he liked watching people sleep and sometimes taking their things. He was a real creepo. He ended up going to prison and was obviously fired that very day. Real scary stuff when you think about it. A guy with access to everywhere in the hotel going around running free rein is just wrong. Anyway, Max, I hope we never meet again, and certainly hope that you never work in the service industry when you leave. My name is Yvonne, and this is the first time I write about what happened to me when I was a child. I was about 9 years old. Allow me to tell you about my family history in order to best understand what I'm talking about. I am the youngest of a big Hispanic family of 12 children. During the early 1970s, my family and I were living in a small village in Chihuahua, Mexico, near the mountains, which made the woods our backyard. My father was a Japanese man who migrated to Mexico with a distant family friend. When he got there, he married my 13-year-old mother through an arranged marriage coordinated by my grandmother. My parents were both somewhat religious, but more than anything, superstitious. Their superstitious beliefs influenced all of mine. For the common symptoms of a cold and flu, it was always the same home remedies, such as herbs and teas, that we grew ourselves, or that we would just walk into the deep woods to collect. For upset tummies, it would be yerba buena or mint tea. If that didn't work, try epazote, a bitter root from a strange plant. It was 4 to 6 teaspoons of castor oil at least 3 times a week. You see, my mother believed that clean intestines equaled a healed body. Our family of 14 lived in a small shack, like a cabin, but less fancy, in the middle of nowhere. We had oil lamps, candles, and our giant wood-burning stove that my siblings and I would surround, especially during the winter season when the snow would basically block the only door we had. I saw plenty of unusual things out of our window that faced directly into the woods, but that is a story for another day. In my village there was a medicine man who we called El Sobador. The villagers would say this so-called medicine man charged extra pesos for his prayers, and 1 peso back then was of significant value, especially for a huge family like ours. The small village also had a lady who was referred to as La Partera. The lady assisted the pregnant women with the arrivals of their new bundles of joy. At present time, these special women are professionals and are now called midwives. My parents had unique beliefs. We had handmade dream catchers that we placed at the entrance of where we all slept. Every time it rained, we were supposed to take it outside the shack and gently shake the oversized, ugly, nightmare-infested dream catcher. The bad spirits would disappear in the rain, and the dream catcher was once again ready to catch our nightmares before they entered our dreams. My mother used to say that we were children, and that if we happened to die we would go straight to heaven, as long as we apologized to each other and said our prayers before going to bed. I still had bad dreams every now and then, so my mother insisted it was because of the dream catcher was nightmare infested. The time came when I got really sick, and when I saw her, or it, then I thought, this is it, I'm gonna go to heaven. For the first few days I really enjoyed the wonderful care my mother was offering to me. I couldn't wait for her to arrive to feed me something yummy, as she carried my herbal tea on this big, round, bright red Coca-Cola tin tray. As the days passed by, I started to feel weaker, and when my mother held me close to her chest, she quietly wept. Her warm tears would fall on my face like drops of sorrow. She wanted to be strong, but her little girl was dying, and she had done everything humanly possible. It was out of her hands now. The end was nigh. Everything that my mother baked or cooked in her small kitchen, I no longer had any interest in eating, and her teas were now ineffective. The nearest city was many kilometers away, and we had no money to pay for a real doctor, and it would take days to make it to the city on horse and cart. The cool compressors my mother would put on my forehead felt like steam coming off my head, and then I saw it sitting there at the edge of my cot. No one was allowed to sit on my cot. Who was it? More rather, what was it? I didn't recognize it. Certainly if the boys would see it, they would tell her that I wasn't supposed to have any visitors sit on my cot, only my mother. But she wasn't talking to my mother or me, or anyone for that matter. I was too weak to do anything. But I was curious, like 9-year-olds are. I had to force my eyes to stay open for a bit longer as I choked on my tears, and upon swallowing, felt a burning in my throat. The thing, or whatever it was, looked terrifying, and it was sitting by my feet. I couldn't even move my limbs, they were too weak. My voice was tired, and I just wanted to sleep. My mother heard me call her and immediately came up to my cot, but she didn't seem to understand what I was saying. I was pointing directly at it, but my mother didn't seem to hear me or see it. That thing was next to me night and day. It looked like a woman, but its back was turned away from me. She was wearing a long, raggedy black lace dress with a black veil that covered her face, head, and it just blended in with the rest of her. I asked when I had the strength, "¿Quién eres?" which means "who are you?" But my voice was just a whisper, and was very scared. I gasped and squeezed my eyes together, covering my head with my blanket, hoping that it was just a figment of my imagination. Once I opened my eyes, I thought the thing would be gone, but it was still there. I could now hear my mother crying very loudly, and my father was now measuring up my body's length, since he would be the one making my small coffin, which was typical for fathers in those days. I glanced at the deep sadness in his face. His already puffy eyelids and his bushy eyebrows could not hide how fretful he must have felt to have to be the one in charge of such a duty. But even he knew of my impending doom. My siblings circled my small bed, and the youngest boys begged, "Please don't go to heaven." I was scared, but as a child I had imagined that going to heaven would hurt, but my limp little body didn't hurt. and my tears didn't want to come out. Somehow I wanted to let my siblings know how much I loved them and how much I would miss them. As I was watching my siblings weep loudly, my 9-year-old brain was concerned about our dream catcher. As I oversaw keeping it nightmare-free, I worried about how my siblings would be after I went to heaven. I was afraid they would forget to shake our oversized dream catcher and would have awful dreams as a result. We were dirt poor, and I wanted to tell them to share my last food rations with Mother, as she always was the last one who sat down at our freshly scented pine table that Father had made to accommodate our large family. I was having a difficult time not only speaking, but deciding who would keep my wood furniture my father had made for me. Days had passed, and my fear of not being able to see my family again just made it so much harder to breathe. My mother's soft prayers were scary to me, as if she was asking God to take her instead, and that I was a child who deserved to live. To think of her selfless love for me brings a tear to my eye. To know my mother was willing to die for me makes me love her even more. I heard a loud commotion among my parents. I wanted to know what the excitement was, but my own body was holding me captive. Then my 2 younger siblings said something along the lines of, "A new medicine man has come to our village, and she's on her way to see you." That's when I felt hope inside. The new medicine man was a woman, and in my country, they're called curandera. My father was almost smiling, but I imagined that my unwanted visitor would get spooked with all the commotion. But it remained. What had appeared even closer to me and was still unmoving. I was examined by the curandera, and even though my family didn't believe in modern medicine, by now this beautiful, satin-skinned German doctor represented a big hope. I didn't understand what was happening. Had it all been a bad dream? Was I not going to heaven anymore? In my confused mental state, I thought if that horrific thing remained visible, then my death was imminent. I struggled with the heaviness of my little body to turn onto my right side from facing the paint-chipped wall. I watched the sun was shining its last rays through the heaviness of the trees surrounding our shack. The curtains on the windows were gently swaying with the light evening breeze. I didn't see the strange figure where it usually was by my feet. I shrieked and finally had the strength to call for my mother. My mother came in and was so happy to hear my voice and wanted to know why I was screaming. I welcomed her warm embrace. I told her about the dark figure in the shape of the woman. She smiled, and as she looked around, with her facial expression assured me that nothing was there. Mother told me that they almost lost me, but the curandera had saved my life. Apparently I had been devastatingly ill, bedbound for about a month. The modern medicine woman was giving me daily injections of pretty powerful medication. I had my 3rd dose, but how come I didn't remember the needle puncturing my skin? I was terrified of needles. My mother returned to the kitchen, and I felt so weak, but somehow I felt as if everything could have been a dream, maybe a delusion caused by my illness. I couldn't be sure. I glanced over, and it was still there at my feet. As usual, I froze, and I just hoped my bed would swallow me whole. I was still very small and very weak. It started to visit less. It was around the 5th day of the curandera coming to our shack to inject my medication. My parents would have to hold me down since the needle puncturing a hole in my skin wasn't anything I looked forward to. Then I glanced over to my feet, and it wasn't there anymore. I sat up in my bed and glanced at the window. It was there. This was the first time I had seen it standing, and even though now I had the strength to scream, I couldn't. I just sat there and stared as my tears were flooding my face. It was most definitely a female-shaped being, about 5 feet tall, and the slimmest female I'd ever seen. I could see more than before, but it had its back turned, peeking from the sides of her black veil, where I could see some long, thin, grey strands of hair. On its right side, an extremely bony right hand which appeared to be holding something like a staff. Its fingers were very long and grey, and it wasn't saying a word nor moving, just standing there looking out the window as the very last rays of sun had come from between the tall trees. The last day I saw it was when the beautiful German curandera came to check on me to give me the last injection. I could hear my siblings outside arguing with each other, and as I stood up from my bed to look out the window, and there it was, standing, facing me now, too far and not enough daylight to see its features, but close enough to know it wasn't human. Then my 9-year-old brain imagined that perhaps this unusual being lived in the woods. There, it was standing almost blending in with a massive tree trunk in our backyard. I couldn't believe my eyes when it raised its bony arm and waved at me, as it slowly blended into the darkness. It almost appeared to have walked backwards, blending into the tree trunk. I had too many questions, but now I was questioning my own sanity. How long has it been since it had rained? Was our dream catcher nightmare infested? How long had it been since I shook the nightmares in the rain? Maybe I had forgotten to do that. To this very day, I remain unsure. But I did get better, and I'm so grateful I recovered and never saw that entity again.
When I was a kid, I must have been between 10 or 12 or something. I had this guy who lived in my neighborhood who was 4 years my senior. We used to play together, and he would tell us these stories about how he used to see fire in certain areas of his house, and the visuals stopped when his grandfather got some holy rituals done in the house. Back then, I never believed him. A few years later, we're all grown up, and Patrick's mum accidentally caught fire in the kitchen. Patrick's elder brother tried to save her and got his hands burnt in the process. No one knows how it happened. And after being in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, she succumbed to her injuries. And at the time, we didn't have those childhood stories in our recollection. And then later that year, we're all friends, and we're just having a late night walk and talking about ghost stories, just joking around trying to scare each other. And Patrick was all quiet and listening. All of a sudden, he says, "Do you remember I told you I used to see fires in my house? See how my mum died?" That was creepy. In the same neighborhood, there is another friend of mine, Tom. Tom's dad was an alcoholic, and you can imagine all the bad things that alcoholism comes with to exist in Tom's life. They were extremely poor. Side note, he's doing great now because he's super dedicated and very humble. But anyway, back then, his dad got diagnosed with tuberculosis. He was hospitalized and things were bad. Now in the apartment below Tom's apartment, there lived a family who had this mentally challenged man who was in his late 40s or early 50s. He wasn't married and rarely left the house. One morning at around 5 a.m., while Tom's father was hospitalized, this old man knocked on Tom's door. Tom opened it groggily, and the man said, "Why aren't you ready yet? Go get ready and visit your dad for the last time." That was the day Tom's father died in the hospital, and he later told me about the incident. Both these stories are so convincing, because I know these guys, and I really don't think they would lie about something as devastating as losing a parent.